want to welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Brattleboro Selectboard. We know the meeting has been properly warned because we were here at 5:30 for executive session. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of the April 17th meeting. Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 17th meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. First up is chair's remarks, and I have one exciting thing. Brooks Memorial Library turned 50. It's been in its present location for 50 years. So the Vermont legislature passed a resolution honoring the library, and I guess with Star and people from the library up
there to receive it.
at the legislature to receive it, and I'll hold it up because it's very nice looking. And I'm assuming people can read it in the library if they're so
Absolutely.
inclined. But we want to thank Valerie Stewart, Molly Burke, Tristan Tolino, and Jeanette White and Becca Ballant, who offered the amendment on Brooks Memorial Library's behalf. So congratulations to the library and thank you to the legislature. Now, does the town manager have any remarks?
I do. I just want to remind everybody that this Friday is Diversity Day in Brattleboro, and that we're going to be celebrating with a party downtown. We're a little scared about the weather, but don't let that deter your plans. Make plans to be there Friday evening between 5 and 8 at Elliott Street between the Harmony parking lot and Main Street. We'll be closing the road. There'll be a variety of activities there. There'll be food, there'll be some entertainment, there'll be community organizations offering both information and activities. And so this is part of the effort that the town is making to collaborate with the school and with others to be more actively involved in actually promoting diversity and inclusion in the community. And in this particular case, Diversity Day started as having a more significant presence in the community about a decade ago. And then after a few years, it became more and more an activity that was just going on in the school system. It stayed very active there since then, but it was mainly with the kids. So the planning committee for this event is a school district committee. There's representatives from different schools from all the different towns, as well as the middle school and the high school. And they allowed me in as an interloper this year to participate, bring some broader town influence into some of the events for the day, and especially for the evening. So throughout the day, there'll be the same kinds of things going on in the schools that have been, and then we'll all come together downtown. We hope that there'll be a good turnout from the broader community. So that's 5 to 8 on Elliott Street on Friday.
Peter, if I could just add, it's also gallery walk, and a lot of the art will be student art that was produced as part of the diversity activities that go on through the whole year. And just want to mention Michaela Sims, the diversity coordinator for the school district, who has been really the strong support for this all through the entire time.
Absolutely.
And the Green Street School will also be open with student art displayed all over the building as well. So
Great.
wander all over town. It's going to be a beautiful night.
Yeah, shout out to Michaela is entirely appropriate, and to the rest of the committee members who have put a lot of hours into coordinating the various pieces of this, especially as the event grew, again, beyond the boundaries of what they have been used to in recent years.
Thank you. Does anyone on the select board have any comments or committee reports that they would like to offer at this time?
I could offer a brief traffic safety committee update. And a piece of good news there's always some bad news about accidents with pedestrians and bicyclists, and there was one right before the meeting, I believe, to spoil a months-long nice distance of time with no accidents with car and pedestrian. But as a piece of good news, if everyone's familiar with the crossing area between the Holton home and I think one of the churches on the other side on Western Avenue, there's this very quaint but rather ineffective system of holding the flags and taking the flag with you and putting the flag back in the box. So finally we've got the ability to put an RFB, which is going to be a flashing beacon.
Okay.
So you'll be able to push a button, have the flashing happen, and be a little safer crossing Western Avenue. So
That's exciting.
And hope people stop.
yeah, always still don't assume everyone's going to stop. That's a good rule.
That's good. That's exciting.
It is.
Does anyone else have any comments or committee reports?
I don't have a committee report, but I'd like to have a comment. The seasonal overflow shelter has closed for the year as of yesterday morning. And so groundwork staff will be working hard to look for a new location, as the location that we had was supposed to be under a one-year contract. And we are, there's work being done to try to get as many people into housing and move that forward as soon as possible. But the overflow shelter, which was overnight accommodations for our homeless community, has closed and will be closed until winter.
Thank you, Brandy. Does anyone else have any comments or committee reports? Seeing none, it is time for public participation, which is the time in our meeting where members of the public can offer a comment on anything that is not on tonight's agenda. So is there anyone in the public that would like to make a comment on something that's not on the agenda? Yes, please come on up. What we ask is that you introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
Hi, my name is Kit Whalen. I live in West Brattleboro, and I'm a member of 350 Brattleboro. And since nothing, as far as I know, related to the resolution that was approved in March is on tonight's agenda, I would like to speak very briefly. I wrote big, and I'm going to limit myself to what I wrote. I'm not going to ad lib. So I know it's a future agenda item, and in the meantime, I just want to thank you for everything you've done in the past, being mindful of climate and environment, and I hope, I am actually confident that you will continue to be mindful of the climate in every decision that you make. In case past achievements of select boards and current select boards get overlooked, I just wanted to give some recognition and some acknowledgement of the great work that has already been done. And number one on my list is the agreement that perhaps 80% or so of the town's electricity will be coming at some point from the solar array at the landfill. This is tremendously exciting and encouraging. I would also like to thank you for the plastic bag ban, which is due to go into effect this year. I know I'm not the only one that has seen reports in the news about whales washing up on beaches worldwide with their guts full of plastic. And we have taken some small steps to maybe try to do something about that. And it makes me proud and happy that we're not sitting back wringing our hands saying, oh my, this is appalling, which of course it is, but we're actually trying to do something about it. Thank you for the bike lanes on Putney Road, making it safer for people who ride their bikes. And there are many people who do this year-round, but especially now that the weather is more favorable. The soon-to-be-put-up sign on Western Ave, the share the road, referring to bikes. This might have already happened, but thank you for that. For forming the Transportation Committee, for implementing pay-as-you-throw and curbside compost and recycling. I know especially pay-as-you-throw met with some resistance initially because nobody likes to pay to throw their trash away. And I was grumbling about this myself, but thank you. I think it raises awareness of the fact that a lot of stuff has been kept out of the waste stream and can be turned into something good, which is compost. The 2009 creation of the Town Energy Committee, supporting that committee and Public Works to change streetlights to LEDs, for funding energy audits of municipal buildings, including money for energy-saving measures at the library and transportation center and the skating rink, and including an article in town meeting this year for the Gibson-Aiken insulation. And it's time to implement the message that the voters sent in March, and I know I'm looking forward to that coming up soon, but I just wanted to look back and acknowledge that a lot of good work has already been done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You make us sound really good, so thank you.
It seems so hard.
I know.
Media got that.
Thank
I
you.
hope Daniel Quick was watching.
Yes. Was Daniel watching?
I don't know.
Ask them to text us.
Yeah, tell us to let them know. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to comment on something that's not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to liquor commissioners. Would someone like to make a motion to convene as liquor commissioners? We have a motion to convene as liquor commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? We are convening as liquor commissioners. And our first and only action this evening is to approve a first-class liquor license for Twin Flames LLC, and I'm assuming people are in the audience. Would you like to come up and sit here? Sure. And but while you're moving up, we'll have the town manager give us a little staff update.
So this proposed liquor license is for a new business that we're going to hear about in a moment that's going in to the location that Brattleboro used to be at 97 Main Street. And we can report that there are no outstanding taxes or fees owed to the town and that all the paperwork is in order. It's been approved by the police department and the fire department, so staff recommends approval.
Perfect. And if you want to introduce yourselves and then tell us about the business,
Sure.
It's a good opportunity for you to get the word out.
Okay, I'm James Casterline, and this is Amber Bergeron, and we are partners for Twin Flames LLC. We have lived in California for quite a while. We've been back here for about 5 years, and tacos is our life. We know that there's a lot of good tacos in the area right now. Something different that we want to bring, though, is a nice sit-down bar, and more of a, Three Stones is excellent. I just think more of a sit-down bar and an all-day Mexican place to go. It's going to be great for the community. I've got a son who starts school and starts kindergarten next year at Academy, so we're here to stay. We're here for a while. I've done a lot. We just got back this morning. We flew in this morning from the Coachella Music Festival, where I've been the executive chef for the last 10 years. We took a red eye last night to make sure we were back in time for this meeting. Besides that, I was the executive chef at Stratton for 3 years. I oversaw 6 different outlets, close to $5.5 million in total operations. So I'm extremely familiar with writing budgets and all food costs and labor costs. But more than that, we just love good, high quality food. Part of what we want to do is source our food, especially our proteins, locally and produce locally. Yeah, that's it. We've got we've got 2 really awesome bartenders. They've been in the business for a long time. One's Mike Kondracki. He works at Manja Beve up in Wilmington, and Matt Slinsky, who's been at the Whetstone for quite a while. He's also the general manager at the Snow Barn. They're both on board, and they're going to be our bartenders.
Nice.
And we're both currently DLC certified. I actually just did mine this afternoon when we got off our flight. So yeah, we're ready to go. We're super excited. Our plan was essentially to be open by. Was officially to be open by May 15th. We ran into a little bit of trouble with ADA bathroom approval. We thought we could have one ADA bathroom upstairs for 86 people, and we were going to put the bar on the other side. And Bob Stevens, who's the owner of that building and our architect working on all of our business plans, he's working really hard right now with the state fire department to see if we're going to be able to do our original plans that we have submitted for the building permits. Right now, they don't know. They don't know if it has to be both bathrooms on the same level, because what we're going to do is build another bathroom on the downstairs level, a bigger one, a more accessible one, and then have the ADA bathroom upstairs. So we're honestly just waiting on approval for that. And once that approval's done, I think we have all of our paperwork moving. We should be able to open as soon as I can build the bar.
Cool.
That's it.
Now, what are your days and hours of operation going to be?
So currently we're going to go 7 days a week. We want to open at 11 in the afternoon, and we're going to close by 11 p.m. I've done some research on insurances and stuff like that, and stop serving alcohol at 11 is quite a bit cheaper than if I decided to go past 11, and that's not really what we were opening for anyway. We still have a family at home that we want to be with. And maybe getting into summer, we've talked to Bob about doing a breakfast as well, a sit-down breakfast in Brattleboro where you can get eggs to order, but also fun things like huevos rancheros and chilaquiles, and we've got a lot of good ideas for that. Cool. And we're also going to have a really cool salsa bar. That's something different that other places in town don't have, that you see in a lot of Southern California Mexican restaurants. We're going to have a full-on salsa bar on the other side, so it's going to be a little bit interactive and fun too.
Yummy.
Does anyone on the board have any questions?
I'm looking forward to it.
And Amber's been doing this forever up here at Stratton. She was a manager at Outback up in Burlington. She lived in Burlington for years, so she bartended for years. My 2 bartenders that are coming are extremely professional, so we all know the ins and outs of everything it takes to run the bar and to keep it a safe place for the community.
I have to report that I saw a discussion on social media that
I saw
somebody
that as well.
actually said, "Do we need another taco place?"
Yes, I saw it as well.
And basically the crowd's response is
It was excellent.
there's no such thing as too many tacos.
That's right.
Yeah, we were
I
like,
agree
do
with
we
that
respond?
response.
You know, we sit back on all the situations and we just read it, and you know, we didn't want to reply, but the outpouring from the community was, that was very nice. We're actually also participating in Diversity Day.
Great.
Elliott Street Fish and Chips, Erin reached out to us and she was like, would you like to set up? I know your restaurant will be open. And we said, absolutely. And we're also setting up at Oak Grove on Friday night. They're doing a little diversity thing, which is going to be Mexican themed. They're going to play the movie Coco. So we're going to go there and set up and do food Friday and Saturday.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. We've got a little food cart that we've been operating out of Mount Snow for the last, since the beginning of winter. We set up at the Snow Barn and we sell tacos late night to people coming out of the bar.
Smart.
Do you know about the farmer's market?
I do, yes. Oh, yes.
Might be some half-year openings. If you want to come check it out.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Wish you luck.
Thank you very much. We're very excited.
See you soon.
Does anyone else have any questions? Does anyone in the
Just
public?
hurry up.
Yeah.
You're telling us.
Does anyone in the public have any questions about the first class liquor license? All right, oh yes, Franz, please come up.
Franz Reichsman, I live in Brattleboro. I would like to know what's the difference between a taqueria and some other type of restaurant?
Okay, but
Yeah,
another type of Mexican restaurant? Sure. So our goal, I don't know if anybody has seen the menu at all. It's on the front board. Most full-theme Mexican restaurants have everything from enchiladas to, fajitas to they're very large menus. The taqueria's purpose is even though we're gonna have nice salads and nice soups and a lot of chef specials that are going to include the ceviches, and we're doing a Mexican version of paella. We're basically focused on our tacos. We're bringing in a taco machine, so all of our tortillas are going to be made in-house to order. All the meats are prepared to order, as opposed to a lot of the things that you may normally get in a normal Mexican restaurant, where it's heated up first thing in the morning and then it sits in the well all day and it dries out. We're going to be doing everything to order. Our main focus is just the tacos. We want to make, we were just in California for a month and it was hard to find a restaurant that actually made their own tortillas, even out there, and it's very hard. It's not easy. I've got a lot of Mexican-American friends that I've known for years working the Coachella Music Festival that are coming back just to help me get going with the tortilla making. And that's pretty much the only difference.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Would someone on the board like to make a motion?
I move that we approve a first-class liquor license for Twin Flames LLC, doing business as Twin Flames Taqueria at 97 Main Street.
We have a motion to approve a first-class liquor license for Twin Flames LLC, doing business as Twin Flames Taqueria. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Let us
Exciting.
know when you're open.
We will. Thank you very much. Hopefully 2 weeks and maybe
Okay.
4, but no later than that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners?
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Now would someone like to make a motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners?
I'd like to make a motion to convene as Water and Sewer Commissioner.
We have a motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We are now water and sewer commissioners. And our first item is the FY19 utility fund budget discussion. We are discussing, not approving tonight?
We are. There's a lot here, and so our intent is to present some information and then assist by answering any questions you might have, discussing with you what's happening here in the proposed utility fund budget for this coming year, and then if you have any direction or any questions that are unanswered after tonight that you'd like us to follow up on between now and our first meeting in June, which is June 5th, we'll do that and then hopefully bring it back in a form that you're ready to approve that evening. A couple of very quick observations just from overview, and then Steve will take you through the details of this proposed budget. It is the result of a collaborative effort with John O'Connor, Patrick Moreland, myself, and Steve. Mostly Steve, and Steve brings to that quartet lots of input and participation from the folks who actually do the day-to-day work in the utility operation of the town. It's a large, important, and complicated operation, both on the water and sewer side. And so there's a lot of different parts here that we'll go through as Steve presents the details. The board has been particularly interested the last couple of years in the rate model. And so one thing we'd like to offer as kind of a starting point to have in mind as you see the budget presented to you, and then we can come back and we'd be happy to go through the model if you'd like to put it up on the screen and talk about it in some detail, maybe try a couple of different variations on what would it look like if it changed to this and what would it look like if it changed to that. We're prepared to do that with you tonight, but we'd like you to start with the thought that the Select Board 5 years ago adopted an ordinance that set us on a course that was mapped primarily related to keeping enough funds available for the kinds of surprises that can pop up, that when it's your water system or your sewer system can be very expensive and very urgent. You know, we've got to get at it, we've got to fix it. So while the balance, it's about $4 million in that fund, is a significant amount of money, we suggest that you view that as a prudent protection against the kinds of bad surprises that can happen, particularly in a system like ours where elements of the system are quite old. So there's that to consider, and overall what we're suggesting is that if you stay the course with this one last year where it would be a 6% increase in the sewer rates and a 2% increase in the water rates, next year, because we'll be entering into a new period, we need to adopt a new ordinance at that time in any case. We believe that the circumstance will be switched entirely because the most recent upgrade about 5 years ago was in the sewer side, significant investment in that plant, but the next one that we need to make together is in the water treatment plant. It's appropriate that the increase that would carry us forward in the next ordinance would be on the water side, and that's good news because the water rates are lower than the sewer rates, and so an increase that is predominantly on the water side is going to be felt a lot more gently in people's pocketbooks than what these rates over this last 5 years is. We recognize that it's been substantial increases in order to keep up with the debt service that we had to pay for the sewer plant. So there's that to keep in mind as kind of what's underneath all of this. Steve will speak to the operating and the capital. The only significant change in the operating is we do propose one new position. We told you in the general fund discussions that we would be proposing one new position. That would be the person that we really need in the utility fund for reasons Steve's going to explain, but we'll also use for the purposes of driving that second sidewalk plow that was approved at town meeting. So, without further ado,
Great.
Steve Barrett.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly go through the budget and walk through and give you an idea of why we had increases in certain areas or where we were level funded in other areas. So just a quick summary, and then if there's questions that the board has about either the operating budget or capital, we're here to answer those questions. So again, not to repeat what Peter said, but in the revenue side, the water and sewer rate analysis model accepted by the Select Board continues to support the utilities division and has performed as expected. This will be the 5th year of a 5-year increase approved by the Select Board in 2014. And staff recommends staying the course with that rate structure. And again, as Peter has said, revisit it next year and then look at what the model is going to look like with different expenses. Personnel, this year was a year of loss of many employees, long-term employees. We lost over 100 years of experience in utilities, which is quite a bit. We lost to retirement and to relocation. My assistant Hannah moved on to Hartford. Congratulations to her. We also had retirement in the water treatment, the distribution and storage, and also my office manager. So we're stacked with new people. But you know, we had a fine group of eager, dedicated employees that are willing to take on the task. And within this budget, what you'll see is there's some increases in overtime, and there's some increases in the training budget, because we feel it's very important to bring these employees on, get the proper training. So you'll see that when you look at the operational expenses, that there's increases. Peter touched on the new employee. The new employee will help this new division with meters, replacing meters, hydrants, and the collection system. And that employee will also operate the new sidewalk tractor in the winter, and that will be funded through the overtime in the regular highway budget. So this is the employee that we talked about at town meeting, and we approved the tractor, so this is the person that's going to fill the slot. Pleasant Valley Water Treatment, it's pretty exciting there. We're looking at upgrading the facility. The budget is based on an average. We put out about 1.2 to 1.3 billion gallons a day in Brattleboro. We have the Pleasant Valley Water Treatment Plant, and we also have the retreat wells on Route 30 that supplements that system. So within this budget, that pays for the operation of both of those facilities. The budget is based on averages and forecasts that we don't know. That could be drought conditions, or we could have fires. And so we have to supply the water for those. So our budget, you'll see many times it looks like the averages are a little bit lower than what we actually budget for, but we try to do that in anticipation of the unknown. And any monies that aren't spent just go right back into the utilities. The other thing we're going to do at Pleasant Valley is we're going to we put a lot of focus into the watershed area. I don't know if any of you have been up there hiking, but we're doing a lot of forestry work up there. The county forester, along with a forester that we have hired, is doing select cutting. And along with that, we're going to improve the fire roads. We're going to work on the invasive plant control with non-chemical devices. They don't, recommend any types of chemicals to be used in the watershed area. So we're going to hire some seasonal help, and that's a pretty reasonable amount. It's like $4,000 for summer for a college kid or even a high school person to work in the watershed. So you'll see that under seasonal help, you'll see an increase. Water distribution and storage, the flushing overtime, again, I touched on that a little bit. The funds will be used to train the new employees during flushing operations. Also, the employees will work as apprentices with knowledgeable employees to learn the necessary skills to maintain and operate the distribution system. The flushing occurs, it's happening right now, and it's happening at night, and it happens between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And the reason for that, the hours, are because that has the least impacts on citizens and the businesses in Brattleboro. Wastewater treatment, the Welcome Center pump station will be completed this summer. As the board may recall, and we have new members on the board, so they wouldn't recall, there's a Welcome Center pumping station, which also takes the Commonwealth yogurt factory, and the waste is pumped from the village of Algiers up along Old Guilford Road and then to the wastewater treatment plant. That Welcome Center is currently, that's a project that we have that's almost completed. It was about a $600,000 upgrade. The state of Vermont has paid for that upgrade in anticipation that the town of Brattleboro will take over that pump station. We have maintained it under a contract for the last 20 years, but now Brattleboro is the biggest user with our business complex out there. So we'll be taking that over. Along with that, we have had some odor problems from the wastewater system related to the factories out there. And so we're going to put an odor control system in the pump station to control odors on Old Guilford Road. It's kind of been an ongoing problem. The Commonwealth itself has an odor control system that's helped, but what we want to do is put a supplemental system in the pump station to make it better, because it's kind of annoying for those people, and we want to make the improvement. We hired an engineer, Aldrich and Elliott. They've been working with us closely on that project to look at the pump station as an independent. And they've also visited the yogurt factory and also inspected our whole system so that they can give us good sound advice on how to deal with the odors. The sewer main line items, holiday and weekend cover, health insurance line items, adjusted to meet current staffing. Under the administration, the liability insurance costs have decreased, and we've had increased funding in the training and professional service line items. Again, the professional service line item, we would be seeking assistance on different projects, and also with the new staff, we may need an engineer from time to time to assist. And the equipment maintenance, that line item is level funded. Chestnut Hill project, this has been going on for probably 10 years or more. And we hope to complete that project this year. We're working with the state of Vermont, and also we hired a different engineer because the previous engineer wasn't performing and getting the project done, so we've got somebody else new in there. Retreat wells, that needs a roof, it's $50,000. Energy efficiency, the balance of the fund, this will be used to address energy efficiencies as recommended in the 2016 energy audit performed by Margaret Dillon. And if you have any questions about that, Patrick is truly well read on that. And we do have a menu of recommendations that will be applied to the utilities division. So we're going to continue with those efforts for energy efficiency. Water treatment upgrades. The engineering evaluation for the upgraded Pleasant Valley Treatment Facility is underway. The engineering evaluation will provide the basis of design and preliminary plans with cost estimates for improvement to the treatment facility. That's pretty exciting to get in a position where we can be looking at our water treatment plant that was constructed and put in service in 1989. So it's providing good service, and now we need to look at how we're going to upgrade that. Waste process water line. We'll talk about this also in another time this evening with an engineering contract, but what this is the wastewater, the water treatment plant itself has lagoons, and the backwash water from the filters go into these lagoons, and then it settles out and it overflows into a stream, which eventually goes to the whetstone. What we're proposing to do is put a sewer collection line that goes from Pleasant Valley Reservoir through Mountain Home Trailer Park and connected to our collection system. So all waste will go to the wastewater treatment plant. Currently, it costs us approximately $34,000 a year to take out the settleable solids out of these lagoons, and it has to be dewatered. There's a special company that comes in and they have a press and they dewater it. So it's very expensive. The payback is there. It'll pay for itself time and time again over the years. We're proposing to do that project with the utilities distribution crew, and that could save as much as $600,000+. The project was estimated at $1 million, but we feel it's in close proximity to our transmission mains. We have two 16-inch mains that come down from Pleasant Valley, and this line will be closely located right next to those lines, so we'd actually prefer to have our crews putting that line in because of the sensitivity of the location. And that would all be done under the direct supervision of a registered engineer. Last year we had the I-91 water main project, which there was a water main at exit 2 on the overpass that had broke. And so the contracts came in very favorably. We saved $125,800 on that project, so those monies will stay again into utilities and go back in. Under water mains, we propose to add some funds to replace aged water mains, and also when the 4 streets are paved. We try to upgrade the utilities so that, we don't have a brand new paved street and then the water main breaks. So those are what those funds are used for. Water meters, we're going to continue to replace our water meters. We have 3,990 water meters in the system, and each time we replace a meter, they're more accurate, it's better for the consumer, it's better for us. So we're proposing to continue replacing meters as we go along. Some of the meters are 20 years old. Sewer projects, there's a capital account. Again, this kind of mirrors what the water account is about, is we try to upgrade sewer mains on various streets or sewer mains in town. The other thing we're going to be looking at is there's some sewer manholes themselves that need lining. So we use an epoxy lining, and that prevents infiltration from going into the sewer system, which then again saves you electrical costs and pumping costs. So that's another thing that's done with the sewer projects. Then we have a new line item. It's the wastewater treatment plant odor control. We've been plagued with odors at the wastewater treatment plant. We've basically, since we started the facility up, the plant was originally designed to produce Class A biosolids. And at this point, when we started that process, we had a lot of off-site odors, which weren't very desirable. And the off-site odors were in a zone, and the zone, I could kind of draw a line from where the treatment plant is over to Public Works, kind of as a crow flies, where South Main Street is, all the way up to Tyler Street, when we started having these problems. We've condensed the problem, we've condensed that zone, and we're using different treatment systems. And again, we've hired an engineer to look at these problems. It's not an uncommon problem, it's fairly popular anywhere you go, and also in Vermont. I was surprised at the number of towns, but then again, I wasn't, because I'm in the business. So we're taking it very seriously, and we want to try to improve that. And some of the weather changes that we have, the winds are predominantly from the north to the south, and we've seen a lot of southern winds coming to the north, and so it's not pleasant. Normally at the plant itself, the odors would go up into the air and go to atmosphere before they ever went to a neighborhood. And that's why that plant originally was on the far end of the town. So that's one thing we're working on it. We have a pretty detailed plan that we're coming up with. There's money, there's money in the operations budget for odor control to pay for the expenses of those systems. And you'll also see that when we look at capital, well, in the capital, and also there's money in the operations. I don't know if I mentioned, but there's $70,000 that we put in the operations budget also, and $100,000 that we're putting in to the capital. And the initial analysis to be done is a little over $40,000, and that basically puts meters out in these zones and tests the wastewater so that we actually come up with a model and then come up with a recommendation to solve that problem. The last part of the capital is vehicles. We have some service trucks that we're replacing, a regular pickup truck, a service truck, a 1992 dump truck, which we've gotten pretty good years out of. And then there's the engineering vehicle, which is a small Suzuki. It was a little 5 or 6 speed, high efficiency. We're going to be looking at a vehicle similar, maybe even a SUV combination electric or whatever. And then there's one more service truck, and the service truck is for the water treatment, and it has a plow. So that's my little overview of the budget.
I think Peter wanted to add one thing.
Just one quick thing before you discuss. I know the board is aware of this, but for the public that's here and the public that's watching, probably most don't have the proposed utilities budget in front of them. So I wanted to underscore that while Steve has focused, because we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of the odor control and the new employee and the other ways in which we're proposing to make new investments and initiatives within the fund. That overall, there's many line items that either aren't changing or actually are showing some savings. And so the net total impact of that for the operating budget that's proposed is a 2.2% increase in the expense side of the utility fund operating budget. So wanted to make sure that for those who are listening, because we focus heavily on the things that we're going to spend a little more money on because we think there's some needs that need to be addressed, that in total, we believe we brought you a responsible budget, and we're looking forward to discussing it with you.
Does anyone on the board have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Brandon, go first.
So looking at the vehicles page, can you talk a little bit about how our commitment to the environment impacts the purchasing of these vehicles, moving away from fossil fuels, et cetera?
There's a couple things that's happening here. At one point, with the service trucks, you'll see replace diesel. The new diesel trucks with their emission control, they actually, they use more fuel because you have to, there's like a reburner system. And even our dump trucks now, have to go at a high idle. They actually go to a certain point, and then there's a restriction in this, in the system, in the filter systems, and then you have to run them at high idle, which seems counterproductive to, you know. So some of the things we're doing is trying to keep, you know, the right size vehicle for the job, not to go too big. And in other cases with the diesel, we're going back to gas because it's more efficient. Then the vehicle can be shut off and it's going to work better. The diesel trucks that we currently have, the service trucks, some of the newer ones, if you turn them off and on, then you have to go and they have to be either run on the highway or you have to go to a dealer and they have to, again, redo those filters. Within the utilities itself, like one example is this Suzuki.
Right.
Was a high efficient vehicle. We have 2 Chevy Cobalts too, which are mini cars. You've probably seen them around town. One's used at the wastewater treatment plant for those personnel that work 7 days a week, and the other's at the water treatment plant. And so those vehicles are out and about testing. They don't always work for us, but they work for us 90% of the time. The water treatment plant's on a gravel road, a dirt road. So what we do is we'll tend to use a pickup just during that small season, during mud season. But overall, it's been pretty efficient.
Okay.
So we always have an eye on it. We're open to looking at it. This 113, we're looking at the Suzuki. We're looking at the state bids to see what they may have available.
Yeah, that was my first thought. Like, is that low-hanging fruit as far as the kind of EV world goes?
And the state bid does have some options, and
Great.
that's what we're going to be looking at. They have it's more of a SUV. It's a little bigger, but it does have a combination.
Great.
So we're going to be looking at that.
Thanks for going through that and explaining the diesel and all of that.
Okay.
I had a question kind of along the same line of those. The 113, the engineering surveying, that could actually be an all-electric vehicle. It's mostly short trips around town. It's going to get plugged in overnight.
Yeah, we're discussing that also, if there might be a possibility.
I'm wondering does it have to be an SUV? I mean, the Chevy Volt.
We're trying to, as we change with personnel and who's responsible for what and where their needs are going to be, we're having discussions on would that model work for it. Like we've talked about, like we could use an electric vehicle just at Public Works for somebody goes and needs a part, somebody's going to go get this, somebody's going to go that. But it'd be adding a vehicle to the fleet, which we haven't quite gone there yet. But we've had a lot of discussions about it. We've actually put in, over the years, we put in to try to get an all-electric vehicle, because it just seems like that application would work. So we're going to look at this pretty hard, and all options are on the table.
And maybe when those Cobalt, like when the Cobalts land on this list, I mean, that seems like that could be a switcheroo there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then mount a station at the, at the facilities to charge them or something. Yeah.
Well, I hope you'll find something all electric that you can use for that, at least for the engineering surveying vehicle. The other thing is why does the water, this purely for information, why does the water meter department need a bigger, heavier truck than the?
Because they work on hydrants, and it's not really a what it is, it's a utility truck that has compartments on the side.
Oh, okay.
So it has a water meter in there, it has the parts to fix hydrants. They're also a service truck. If the other crew is working on something, there's an emergency, somebody's line breaks, they respond to those. So they need full
Yep.
equipment.
Oh, yeah, something was happening, was that Saturday night on Western Ave?
They're flushing
They were
water mains.
flushing.
Yeah, I drove by, that was cool. I
What are you
drove
doing
really
out that
slow.
late?
What?
What was I
Next
doing out that
question.
late? Do you have more questions?
I do.
I do, but if
Oh, yeah.
you want to go ahead.
Do you want to just keep
Sure,
on going?
I have one or two. The unfortunate odor control problem, you mentioned an initial analysis, maybe 40K is in the budget.
Yes.
Is there a timeline on any of this stuff?
I talked to I just got a proposal for this. It would be done this summer.
Okay.
And then I don't know how soon we can implement the recommendations.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty complete survey. They actually will put meters in different areas of the town, and then they'll do testing, and all that testing goes out, and they determine the levels. Then they leave the meters in there, and then you start to make adjustments, whether it be a chemical application to keep the odors down, or covers, or changing the filter medias that you have. And then you continue to test to determine how effective, the things that you're trying, to see how effective they are. So, but the initial will tell us, again, visualize a zone. Our goal is, let's stay within our borders. We want to be within our fence line. That seems realistic,
Right.
but then, you got to prove where is it going, how's it getting there, and
It seems like it'd be a tough situation because it's also not, a set thing. It fluctuates, right? Based on winds, based on
temperatures.
output.
Temperatures are big. The warmer
Yeah.
temperatures, there's more complaints. Of course, more people are outside. Your windows would tend to be open in the summertime. People are out on the street later at night, events and such. So that's where we get most of our complaints in the summer.
Yeah.
And again, it all depends on the wind.
I've noticed it at Harris Lot when I used to work at the bank and I parked there. I
Yeah.
know it travels a little.
Just up the river.
Just right up the river, yeah.
It sounds like you're on top of it. It's just something that obviously people have concerns over, and we don't want it to affect.
Well, they have serious
property
concerns,
values.
and we agree with them. And
Yeah.
we have I have a log of what we ask people to do is email us. We keep a log. We send somebody out. We respond to the area to see if there's something unique about it, or what's going on at the treatment plant at the time of the complaint, so that we can use all that information. And that's what that's what we've really been doing for the last couple of years. And it seems like it takes too long, and people get a little bit frustrated with that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered.
Can I-
The other thing is, just so you know, that the person, this Boker and Associates from Maine that we're hiring, they've done over 200 projects throughout the United States, and the engineer that's in charge of this, he's actually written manuals for odor control with the EPA, and he has quite good credentials, and we have a lot of confidence in his ability to break this thing down for us and give us advice.
Can I ask an odor control question before you go on to your next one?
Yeah, my
Just-
next one's probably easy.
Okay.
Go ahead.
While we're on the
Yeah,
topic.
yeah, please.
So it's going to be $40,000 to study it? Is that what it is? And then another 70
It's,
at the?
no, it's $39,910.
Okay, and what's
And
that
then we're
for?
also, and what that gives us is they'll go through the whole plant, they'll look at the process, they'll do air testing, and then what they'll do is they'll come up with a recommendation. They'll come up with a paper with a recommendation and a menu for us to look at, and we'll have cost, so we can look and say, okay, this is a problem, and here is a solution, and here are the possible ways to solve it, and here's the cost.
So where does the 70,000 for the wastewater treatment plant, 10,000 for the pump station in the operating budget, and then the 100,000 for the wastewater treatment plant in the capital? Is that money that we've already figured out that you need to spend, or is that money you're putting aside, so whatever these people say we're gonna spend it?
That's money that, there's three pieces to this, so it is
Yeah,
complicated.
Yeah,
One of the line items is for Broad Brook Road. okay? And that's just for chemical application, which is $10,000, okay? So that's just to take care of that one particular problem. The $70,000 is for the wastewater treatment plant itself. We are currently we're using different chemicals down there that can equate to $70,000 a year right off the bat. The $100,000 is our capital investment that we're looking at. We're going to take the 39, okay, and we're going to hire engineering along with our other engineer, not Forshire, but Aldridge and Elliott. They're going to be there also looking at everything for a recommendation, so a percentage will be there. And then they may come up and say, well, right now we want you to try X, Y, Z. So there's going to be a cost associated with trying different things, different models.
So they know which one works best.
Right.
They're
So-
there all that
so
time. while
like
that's
it's
going on.
effective. Or they may say, you know what, you need to change your anthracite coal filter, and that's gonna be a cost of $20,000. And it's like, okay, so we'll have money, that's odor control, that's gonna make a difference. Yeah, let's change that media. And then they may say, you need to change that every 3 months. You may need to change that once a year. So it may change because of the odor problems we're having. There may be a different recommendation to solve the odor problem. So we need those funds to help us to try these different, or the, different methods for the odor control.
Right, so when it's under 2019 capital, it says 100,000. Based on what we learned, the 2020 could be, or would that be in the operating budget
It could
going
be,
forward?
you're gonna get a report that says, and you're gonna get a menu that says, okay, these are the options. And then it could be, well, and then it may just go to operations. It may be, well, for now on, it's gonna cost us $100,000 a year to deal with odor control, and that will keep it within our boundaries.
Well, that was basically my question.
Right.
Just this money isn't necessarily going to be it. There's going to be probably more investments that we're going to have
That's
to make
correct.
for odor.
Yep.
Okay.
So, yep. And we don't really, and that's the value, I think, of this report, is to get the report done, so then we have somebody who has done this in other facilities,
Yeah.
and been successful.
All right. I'm sorry, Tim.
I think I'm going to skip it. It was about health insurance, crazy jumps. But I think everyone knows it's really expensive. So, I'm not-
Steve, was the design that the odors would basically dissipate, they'd go up and dissipate, and the way it worked out with changes in the wind and stuff, that didn't happen, or is there something wrong?
There was
with
an
it?
expectation with this multiple phase digestion to go to this Class A product, that once, and basically to simplify that a lot, is you're heating the biosolids to a higher temperature to kill the pathogens, so that that can be reused as a fertilizer pretty freely. A Class B has certain limitations that can be used on agricultural fields, for certain agricultural fields. And so to go to this Class A, it was felt that, like, one of the things that we're looking at is one of the tanks is an open tank. And the suggestion was that a cover was not needed on that, because the odors wouldn't be there, because you're gonna heat the biosolids to a higher temperature, so therefore there wouldn't be really many off odors. May be true, may not be true. The heating of the sludge to get it up to this higher temperature caused a lot of odors, and there's a filter system for that, an anthracite filter system. We're gonna have to look at that, because maybe that needs to be a different size or a different type of media. So there's kind of multiple layers to the
But basically, the
problem.
design, the way it was designed, this wasn't supposed to happen, and so now you have to.
There was an
kinda-
expectation for this to happen, there was always gonna be a certain amount of odor coming from the treatment plant.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And there was actually steps taken even in the headworks. That's where the septic receiving comes in, and that's where all the sewer from the whole town comes in. There's actually a filter system there too. And right now, we have these like gel blocks that are put on there to help, and misting units that can grab some of the odors and knock them down. But those weren't in the original design. So we're also taking a good look at what was designed, and then this report will actually look at that also.
I've got to get out there now. I got to go look now, so.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna
Right?
take a field trip.
Yeah.
We invite all of you anytime to come down, because there's a lot to this.
When the wind is blowing from the north.
When it's going from the north to the south.
90 degrees.
I had a few other questions, not necessarily about the waste, but you've filled a couple of positions, you're adding a water service person, you still need to find a superintendent, and you've got a couple seasonal employees, and I'm wondering, how have you been advertising, and how are you advertising, and what steps are you taking to try and identify qualified candidates of color for these positions?
I've had a lot of discussions with Peter, town manager, and what we're doing right now is I'm kind of polishing the job description. So we're going to be looking for a candidate similar to the candidate we had, and along with the qualifications. The challenge we think is going to be within the utilities division. There aren't a lot of people out there that have the expertise in water, drinking water, wastewater, and distribution and storage. There's a lot there. So we're gonna. Last time we looked at a superintendent, we went nationally. There's trade affiliations that we have. American Water Works, we have New England Water Works, we have the local Green Mountain for the state. We advertise with them to see if we, maybe draw some candidates from outside. So we'll be looking at it to try to get the right person in here to fill that void.
The water service person and the seasonal employees, they're less demanding backgrounds or
No,
resumes?
that's becoming a challenge too. Even the wastewater treatment plant, they're certified. You take an exam and you're certified by the state, and it's under the licensing board now. And so it's a pretty good challenge. It's like a 13-week course, and so we're finding everybody is finding difficult to get younger people into the industry.
Who already have the credentials.
Yeah, or even basically, and the police department has had this problem longer than we have. You're going to get people based on pay, on what you're paying them, and what you can offer for benefits. And then it's kind of this juggling act between the different towns. We just lost my assistant to go become a director. And we've lost people that went to other communities around us, to Keene and to other communities, because we have a pretty good program. And so our employees make good candidates for other places. So that's going to be the challenge. As we look at these, you have to look at the pay, and you have to look at the qualifications and what's needed.
I had a question about you mentioned, this is just pure ignorance, the energy efficiency, the balance of the fund. I was looking in the budget for the energy efficiency fund, and I didn't find it. What is the fund?
It's in the capital,
Oh, okay.
and
That's why I didn't find it.
you'll see it's the third one down on the capital plan. It's called energy efficiency.
Oh, yeah.
There's an
Great,
existing 150,000.
Great, thanks.
And we didn't expend any of those funds in last year's budget, so we're just asking you to carry those over.
Right. And that comes from the utilities?
That comes from the
That's part of
utilities.
your revenue, and you
Yep.
set some aside. Great.
Yep.
Great, thanks. And, so you still got a couple of thousand water meters that need replacing?
Yeah.
Great. How do you measure, is there a meter for water coming in and wastewater going out of each? How do you get the waste?
Everything's based off the water meter. Unless there are some extreme circumstances where there's a sewer-only account, or we do have water-only accounts. For instance, if it was a bakery and they're using large volumes of water that don't go into the sewer, they would have a water-only account. But residential, for all water you use, you're paying the sewer fee also. And the catch to that, and most water departments do this, is your garden hose, if you use your garden hose, you're paying for water and sewer. And it's considered more like a luxury to use your garden hose. That's why you're paying a premium. The utility, you could separate them, but the users in the end if you figured you had to add a meter at every single house.
Oh, no, I thought you were saying
But just
that
so you
there's
understand.
you pay a certain amount for the water that comes in, a certain amount for the water that goes out, which is, how do you meter that? But you don't, that's what I
Yep,
thought.
you meter it once,
Yeah.
but then there's a different fee set
Right.
structure for the
Right.
water and the sewer.
Right, thanks. Yeah, I didn't think there was a meter for what's coming out.
But some people do choose to have water-only accounts too. But you pay a
So
base
they-
rate too.
Yeah, but
So
they're
now
not
that
hooked up.
we've changed the base rates, you could technically buy, so you'd purchase a meter, that would cost you about $250. You'd get a plumber, and then you could have a water-only account, but it'd be quite expensive. And then you would pay base charges on that year-round when you're not even using the garden house. So there's an avenue for that, but it's not very desirable.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions?
No.
I have one quick question. We're taking over the Welcome Center pump station.
That's correct.
Is that going to mean anything more, like financially for us?
Within this budget, we added a new line item, it's called pump stations. And so that's to begin the process to separate the cost of the pump stations, Welcome Center, but we also have other pump stations throughout the system. We have, I think it's 5 total. So you'll see
It's
on
on page
page
four.
Page 4, yep, where that's a separate line item, and you can see right there, that's 87,500. That number's a little high, but that's gonna include all the pump stations that we have. And the reason we're doing that is because the electrical cost for those pump stations was coming out of the same account as the wastewater treatment plant, which kind of gave you a false sense of what the energy consumption was at the wastewater treatment plant itself. So those fees for pump stations were included in the wastewater plant. This way, we pulled them out, and then you'll notice that some of the accounts we kind of level funded or reduced in the wastewater treatment plant to account for the shifting. So those are going to be the new costs associated with the pump station.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions on this portion of our presentation?
No, thank you for clarifying it.
Very comprehensive.
Now we're going to look at the modeling. It's very hard to see, but the I'm not, I need stronger glasses, but I
If
can't see a thing.
Call your attention to a couple of pieces of it. So, what you see is some revenue information at the top, and you see revenue and expense for the water side, and then the same thing for the sewer side, wastewater underneath it. For your purposes, I think, in terms of the broader perspective of where we are with the fund balance and with the rates that are the rate increases that are being implemented through the existing ordinance and then possibly in the future. What you see in the FY19 column is the final year of the prior ordinance with a 6% increase in wastewater rates and a 2% increase in water rates. And the anticipated year-end fund balance of approximately $3.8 million. What we're showing in the other 4 years, just for the purposes of this example as a starting point for the discussion, is 6% increases on the water side because of the fact that we're going to need to make a greater capital investment on the water side when we do the water treatment plant upgrade that's being designed now. The design work is going on now, and you'll be making decisions within the next year that are going to direct how that moves forward. We've got a very preliminary number of about a $7.5 million bond that we think will be required in order to implement that project. So you see in the model that there's actually at the capital debt line item up near the top, there's an item that begins at $223,730 in FY19 and then goes, or actually FY20, sorry, and then goes up into the 600s for the other 3 years of this particular period. That's the debt service on the bond if it does turn out to be a $7.5 million bond, sorry. We think it'll be about $600,000 a year of debt service. So that's in the model, and it's on the water side. And as I mentioned earlier, to the actual consumer, a 6% increase on water is only about half as much impact as a 6% increase on the sewer side. So where we've had 6 on the sewer and 2 on the water for each of the last 4 years, we've got 1 more year scheduled for that under the current ordinance. What we believe will be sufficient, and you can see how it affects the fund balance, keeps it at or above $4 million in the forecast period, would be to have zeros for the new ordinance for the wastewater side, and 6 is on the water side, and a much smaller impact to the household
Now,
cost.
can you tell us why we have so much money in the balance?
Yes, it's
What's the purpose of
the
it?
purpose of it is to protect us because of the essential nature of the wastewater system and the water system. When something goes wrong, it has to be fixed, and it can be very expensive. And so in order to make sure that we're protected, so there are elements of the system that are relatively new. There are also elements of the system that are very old, and Steve could speak more specifically to that if you want to take a deeper dive into the parts that we are concerned about that are our more vulnerable areas. But the point is that we bring you proposed capital programs that address needs in a sort of methodical manner, but there are always surprises. So the most recent one that we had that cost on the order of about $500,000 was the Western Avenue water main that was failing and absolutely had to be repaired last summer. So you authorized that we did it. We were fortunate in that one. It was good pricing and a well-managed project. We actually saved $125,000, but it still cost us several $100,000. So there isn't an absolute figure that we need to maintain in there, but we believe that it's prudent to be maintaining around a $4 million balance.
I thought you were saving that for the new water plant.
So one decision, depending on how the details of that come out, one decision that the board will want to look at is whether you want to use some of that cash and bring down the cost of the borrowing.
Yeah.
And we can run a bunch of different scenarios on that when we have a better handle on what the actual scope of the project's going to be. But that engineering work is being done right now.
Can we have that on paper? Or
Yeah,
is
I was
Sure,
gonna ask
you
if we
can.
could get
The
a
reason
hard
that we're showing it that way, I'm sorry it's
because it's kind of a moving
far away
target.
and inconvenient. The reason we did it is in case you wanted to play with some different scenarios of what the rates might look like. We could change it in real time and you'd see the impact up
I
above.
see.
We made him do that last year, so he's
right, we
anticipating
did.
trouble again.
But we'd be happy to print it out for you and show you exactly what's there as a starting point and then have further discussion of this going forward.
I see. I wasn't sure this was the meeting you wanted to have that discussion, or
Well, so on June 5th, we'll be asking you to approve the utility budget. And unless you give us some indication tonight that you want something different, we'll bring it back to you in this form and ask you to approve it formally that night.
So you're basically asking for our input to possibly play around with different models for how different things may look and impact.
Yes, but the rates themselves don't require your action this year.
Okay.
You could choose to open that up and run some different scenarios and see whether or not you want to address that ordinance. But you could also let the final year run on
Yeah,
the
that's
five-year
what-
ordinance.
that's what was
Which is
mentioned
what we're
earlier.
recommending.
Yeah.
So that over the year ahead, as we get a better handle on what that water project is going to look like, because that's going to be, multiple millions of dollars of investment one way or the other, whether it's cash or whether it's bonds or a combination of the two. So we'd suggest that you leave the rates the way they are, not take action on the ordinance this year, and that we work together in the months ahead to decide what that new ordinance ought to look like next year. So that we can go deeper into this, or you could choose not to. What will require action at one of the 2 June meetings is the adoption of the utilities budget before July 1st.
Now, one of my questions about this, and because last meeting, we agreed in concept to help put a project together for Cultural Made Vermont.
Right.
Again, it's only in concept, but that would go from anywhere from like $850,000 to 1.1 what was it, 6 million?
Correct, 1.5. Yep.
1.5 million. So
Yep.
that, to me, is a factor in this.
Absolutely. So that would come straight out of that $4 million and
does
then
it-
be replenished by the, at least in part and possibly in total, by the connection charges and the grant, the EDA grant that we intend to apply for.
With good luck.
But initially,
And it
the
would.
cost would have to come right off that bottom
Okay.
line.
And it would why would it have to come off that bottom line?
Because we'd have to spend the money
Right.
from the utility fund to
Yeah.
make the improvement before we'd be eligible to receive either the connection charges that would flow.
But what I'm saying is, we're saying we're gonna take the surplus funds and use it on that. We're not gonna change the water rates, this is what I'm saying.
That's
the
correct.
rates.
That's
But-
correct.
But
We-
is there an option to change the rates if we wanted to accommodate for that? I'm not saying we're going to. I'm just saying, I'm not saying we're going to, but I'm just
Right.
saying, we need to know what all the options are.
If
And
you-
one of the options is using surplus funds, but one of them
Correct.
is saying, hey, we're gonna change the rates and have people pay, not that I'm saying we're going to.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, and that's exactly what the model is for, so that if you wanted to raise rates for that,
Right.
rather than use the surplus funds, we could
I'm-
use the model to determine how much rates would have to go up.
And I'm not for raising the rates, I just want us to
Right.
all understand that there's more than one option
Right.
that we could use if
And-
we wanted to, if we choose to do what. we
And in
might
terms
do.
of how to, prudently manage both the asset that we have and the funds to manage that asset, what we would suggest to you is that in situations where you don't reasonably expect to recover the funds, we should be putting that into the rates. In the case of the tentative commitment that has been made to make those improvements related to the Culture Made Vermont project, if that project does indeed move forward, that we would expect in relatively short order to recover from a combination of connection charges and the grant that we apply for.
Plus, the revenue we would get from that connection would be significant to the.
That's
to
correct.
To that balance as well.
Once it's repaid, we actually would imagine that would have a stabilizing influence on the broader rates for the whole system.
But for this budget for now, that's not gonna, we won't be able to factor that in because it's not timely.
It's not certain that it's going to happen, and we're still doing the engineering to
Yeah, so
confirm
we
the
can't-
pricing,
we're
and
not
it
gonna
would be
change- yeah.
very premature to actually put a number
So,
on.
yeah, so finishing off this 5-year plan makes sense.
So me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so can I be the guy that asks,
We already knew. We were gonna be.
Yeah,
what happens if we cut the 5th year in half on both sides?
Patrick can show you right now.
Do your magic.
Absolutely. Can you explain?
Oh, sorry. Absolutely. What? 1%.
I can do it. I just need to understand what it is you're seeking.
I'm looking at a 2% increase as scheduled in the 5th year of the ordinance, and I would like to change that to 1, and then the 6% increase, change that
To a
to a
three.
3.
So in fiscal 19, are you 2
Yeah.
and 6 or something else?
1 and 3.
1 and 3.
3? All right. 1 and 3.
And then I think,
600 grand out of the balance in
what
the
did it
last year.
do?
I might be able to focus in just on
that wasn't too much,
on this section if you'd like.
much change on the combined balance.
So
There's gotta be
what you'll
something.
see in any time that you change that first year is a relatively modest change in the first year and a
nice.
So
compounded
much better.
impact as you go out
We
into
go-
the future.
We
So-
go 2 and 6 again, and then we can see what it will.
Yeah,
remains.
that
Sure.
was-
Especially the watching.
So
the-
Go
there's
back and then
two.
we'll see what it says.
I'm much
There's
happier
your
with this
6.
resolution.
3, 7, 8.
So 4-8 at the outset
So-
of 23. At 2023 out there. in the-
Yeah, 3-8 and 4-8
and
is your starting
surplus
point, right? For the first year and the last year. And then if you change it, Patrick, to the 1 and the 3, please.
3, 7.
You're at
3,
3-7,
6,
so that's not
4-2.
much of a change at all, but you're down to 4-2 in the out year. So there is a longer-term impact that comes if you change it in the early years.
And that's the money for the water plant, in my mind. That's that surplus. If that gets reduced, there's less cash we can spend to upgrade the water plant.
Sure, yeah. That's your argument that you're making against?
To leave
not-
it the way it is? Yeah.
Well, it feels like I have a lot of work to convince the rest of the board members, but I mean, this is similar to what our discussions on the town side and everything that we went through a town meeting. This is the ratepayers' money, and the rates are tough on people, so it's something to look at.
Yeah, we talked about a long time last year, that very similarly, that we were convinced to just leave it for now because of that future cost.
And then it's probably not prudent to get into the,
But we still would have future costs anyway if we changed it and didn't go into the 5th year. Wouldn't we still have future costs at some point anyway for rate change?
Yeah, we have to have a new water plant.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's every
just a
5
question,
years we have
if
an
we had 5 million instead of 4.2, that's potentially 800,000 we could put as cash, so we wouldn't have to borrow and pay interest.
right, but I'm surprised Brandy is,
I'm
you're
not
making
go-
a
I
face
mean,
because
I'm
I
not
know
rocking
at
that
town
argument.
meeting you argued for, sometimes it is good to
Yeah.
bond out.
That's right, yeah, I'm not necessarily, that's not my reasoning for wanting to leave it. For me, I feel like completing the cycle that people have been studying is a good thing, and then I'm quite relieved to then be the heck out of that cycle for the next 5-year ordinance coming up.
Yeah, see where we are.
That's my feeling. I think we can bond out. Losing 800,000 in year 5 does not keep me up at night. If it meant, if that was the reasoning that other people were using, that wouldn't be the one that I would use. For me, I just want to finish out the cycle and then start anew.
Okay.
Because that's the 2020 and beyond, the 6060 hasn't been decided.
Correct.
So
You might
those
end
are
up with
just numbers that
all
are in there.
zeros, or you might
Right.
end up with some other mix there,
Right.
once we actually have updated information to bring you regarding that water project.
I mean, it could be like 3 zeros, or 3 and 0 or something like that.
It
6 is
absolutely could.
not- That
Or-
6
or
is not
3
our
and 1,
gospel.
Yeah.
in any
No.
way.
See threes? We can do threes.
Well, I was
It's fun.
afraid of getting into that
We'll be here
discussion.
till
probably.
I mean, it is fun, but we
Keep doing it.
Yeah,
probably
but we don't.
shouldn't.
We got a lot left of the agenda.
That's when it gets where Tim wants it to go.
So
Yeah, that's true.
I just want to point out that it hasn't just been 6%, like one rise. It's been 2 and 6 every
Right.
single year.
For
Right.
5 years,
For 5
right?
years.
Right,
Yeah,
that's
which
what I'm
is a
saying.
30
Yeah,
cent,
That's a lot.
30%
it is a
increase,
lot.
yeah.
It's a heck of a
30%
lot.
increase over 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
The
a
other
lot.
thing to remember, though, is that when we started these rate increases, they were superficially way low. And so what happened was, there was a time when the water and sewer commissioners were trying to mirror the general fund budget, but what happened was it wasn't really the best way to treat a utility fund. So they kept them artificially low, and then when we had this debt, that's the reason that we had to come up with such high numbers.
And that happens, and
So
and that's
we're way
unfortunate.
behind. If we had been ahead, there wasn't really
Right.
any money in the reserve at all. So it's been a tough uphill battle, but it's been a responsible
Yeah.
Right.
way to do it. And in some years, in the model, when we looked at it originally, there was deficits. And so that balance actually covered those deficit years so that the rates could stay the same. And that's why we ended up with that's why the board at the time, the water and sewer commissioners, elected to keep those consistent numbers. Because there was fluctuations where there's actually deficits, so that those reserves actually plugged in those holes, so we didn't have to have an 8% one year and a 10 another, and a 3 another year, so it kept the flow consistent.
Thanks for that insight.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I want to have a consistent flow.
Yeah.
So we're not taking any action tonight. We're going to do June 5th, which is the plan.
Thanks for your
But we
live
can
numbers.
still ask questions on June 5th.
We have to approve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. That was very good, thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Next up is, I'm sorry, I meant to ask the public, do they have any questions? Yes. Mr. Estee,
With computer in hand.
I'm sorry.
That's because I don't remember anything from there to here. It's Wayne Estee, 83 Main Street. several things you touched on, some things you didn't touch on. I don't want to put you on the spot and make you answer something, so maybe this that you're not prepared for. So maybe what you can and can't, we can get together another time. Regarding the labor force, the entire utility industry is suffering the same things, and they're all poaching each other's employees. I guess the average age is in the late 50s. And so I'm wondering if you could elaborate on your succession planning and cross-training and retention efforts besides pay, because pay's a zero-sum game.
Yep.
The second thing, I didn't hear you talk about what are the impacts of the Federal Clean Water Act and Vermont Clean Water Act on your forecast for expenses. And I didn't hear anything about your meter access, your loss and unaccounted for, and your shut-off ability. And the last area was sales forecast and what your cost of service study age is, and your depreciation study age, so
Okay.
that you can really understand what your
Yep.
rates need to collect over time.
So one of the things that the utility is undertaking right now is called the Asset Management Plan. The board supported that. We got it actually through a grant. And that will speak to the succession plans. It will speak to an inventory of our assets, so we clearly understand what we have and what the future expenses will be. As far as the Federal Clean Water Act, we participate anytime we can with grants or funding for the different elements to keep the costs down. We have to follow all the regulations and stay in compliance for clean drinking water and also for processing water at the treatment plant, which are two different beasts. And the meter loss, each time we've done a survey on water loss, we have a very tight system, a good system that's secure compared to a lot of our distribution system has been upgraded very well over the last 40 to 50 years with large improvements. When the water treatment plant process was when the plant was built, there's also efforts with the main transmission lines all the way up to Western Avenue, and then new transmission lines were put in across where the Creamery Bridge is, across Chestnut Street, Maple Street, and pressure reducing vaults were also put in to lower the pressure. So when you do have leaks, even in your homes, it wouldn't have as big an impact. So there's been a lot of different approaches taken here to look at the system. We do have some young people that are part of the utility now that have come along with it. Our concern is with some of these more technical jobs at the water treatment plant and also the wastewater treatment plant. Those are areas where we're working closely, Green Mountain Water Association, New England Water Works. We're members of those different groups, and that's where we can enhance and look at new operators and take the operators that we have and educate them to a higher level.
Thank you. That was great. Do you do a sales forecast and a cost of service study or anything like that? That is the commission.
It's really, in the rates, I don't have a sales forecast. We can't tell a lot of times. It's depending on the weather. The sales for water, if we have drought conditions, our sales go up. There's a few industries in town that are high consumers of water that we can't predict, and that depends on the water quality of the river. So if they go off the river, they go onto our system. And then we have new industry that's coming into town, which we can somewhat forecast. And then some of the existing users that we have, they're very consistent as far as the consumption. So it's a matter of what conditions are will dictate whether we have an increase in our usage.
And one additional aspect of that is in the model, the prior years are updated as they occur to reflect the reality. So some of those fluctuations, depending on weather and other circumstances that Steve described, they get reflected in the reality of whatever occurred in the actual numbers for a given year. So there's a lot of years in this spreadsheet that are not showing on here because they're the ones that were part of the rate study that was done that led to the current ordinance. So each year as we look at what's out in the near future ahead, it's affected by the actuals from not just the prior year, but the compounded impact of the prior years before that.
And the rate structure also took into account for if you increase the rates, people will consume, they'll consume less. Because if it costs more, then they're going to conserve. And that trend has been true where our usage has actually gone down based on the rates. But then there's a holding point where, you know, if you have a toilet that was a 5-gallon flush and you put in the 1 and 2 gallon, you've met that threshold. So that was kind of factored into this rate account when we looked at it.
So the cost is, how old is the cost of service, so you know? I mean, small users use the same pipe as a large user, but they don't use many units.
That's right.
And so how do you know that your rates, how recently have you looked that your rates are appropriately charging the big ones and the little ones appropriately?
That was the rate study that led to the ordinance that was adopted 5 years ago. So we'd be looking at updating that in the coming year.
Thank you very much. That was,
you're welcome.
Very good.
Thank you. Franz, did you have a question?
Yes, Franz Reichsman, Finance Committee. First of all, I want to say that we have beefed up the Finance Committee's workforce by adding Wayne Esty to our group, who is very well informed on these subjects and will be sort of spearheading our efforts to add the utilities budget to the things that we are planning on reviewing for the coming year. We haven't done that in past years, at least for the past 3 years. And now that we have a little bit larger membership, we're thinking of expanding a little bit. And really this year, I think, is going to be introducing ourselves to the topic. So in that vein, I would like to say that it's very helpful to have the budget document that's in the package for this meeting, and I'm hoping that that can continue to be available. I know that those documents sometimes disappear after a few weeks, and I would suggest that maybe that could still be available for people to look at, and that maybe it'd be really helpful to me, who doesn't know about this stuff, to have even more of a narrative with some historical information on things like the rate study and how that will be reviewed in the next year and stuff like that. I know that I can get that stuff just by coming and talking to people, but I think if it was out there for the public, that maybe a larger group of people would also be able to educate themselves and be more interested in this topic. So thanks for the information and the presentation, and we'll be looking at this along with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Come back June 5th.
For sure.
All right, thank you. Next up, we're going to talk about, Steve is going to talk to us about the contract for the final design of the waste process water line at Pleasant Valley.
So we, Dufresne Group is the engineers that we have hired to evaluate the upgrade to the water treatment plant and also to give us analysis on the cost of the waste process line. So we have a contract here we're asking you to approve for $38,800, and that's for Dufresne Group to do the final design on the waste processing line, and that will complete this cycle with all the permits and actually assist us to get this project done with our crews.
Now, how long have you been working on this project?
1 year.
We want it done. Don't want it to go more. Does anyone on the board have any questions?
Maybe this is in all the materials, and I apologize if it is, what's the timeline for their work?
The time we're hoping to, if we can get all the permits in place, once this final design is done, we're looking at this construction season. And if it's not completed within, and construction season means basically from July 1st till November, and then maybe the completion of that project would go into next spring. You know, if it wasn't completed, then what we do after, in the springtime, we go back and finish it up.
And are there measures in place to, like, what would determine success as we go along?
It's a pretty, the success would be the number of feet that get installed. There's 3,640 feet of 8-inch pipe. And it's on an existing road. And again, I think I talked a little bit about the challenges. There's two 16-inch water mains on that same roadway. So we've already gone through all the environmental checks and wetlands and all the other components necessary. This would give us the final design, would actually give us blueprints so that we could construct this pipe. So there's not a lot of restraints. Some things that could come up are like ledge or things that are unknown, but we've done some drilling also to look for that. So it seems fairly straightforward.
Okay.
And that's what we're hoping for.
And this is the one that Steve was speaking about earlier tonight, where the estimated cost to contract for the work was over $1 million, but we believe that we can actually do a more careful job with the installation because of the uniqueness of the location with our own employees, and by doing that, save several $100,000.
Anyone else have any questions? Anyone in the public have any questions about the Pleasant Valley line? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move to authorize the town manager to execute a contract in the amount of $38,800 with,
Dufresne.
thank you. Every time, Dufresne Group for the final design of the waste process water line project at the Pleasant Valley Water Treatment Facility.
We have a motion to authorize the town manager to execute a contract in the amount of $38,800 with the Dufresne Group. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Can I just ask, go back to a topic for 1 sec? Because we're about to talk about something and it's on the list, and I should have asked this before, and David sort of did. Do you think on June 5th, we could just get what the list of energy efficiency projects still remain in the utilities?
Yeah,
Budget.
we have a whole written report.
Okay, and it just doesn't have to be anything big, but maybe like just a list, because one of our goals is going to be to keep track of the energy efficiency projects throughout the town.
Sure.
So, don't do anything big and fancy. Don't waste a lot of trees.
We won't.
I know, depressing. Would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn as Water and Sewer Commissioners?
So moved.
We need to adjourn as Water and Sewer Commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We are on to unfinished business. Thank you, Steve and Patrick.
Thank you.
We have unfinished business, which is going back and talking about what our goals for 2018-19 are. We started this discussion last meeting. And since then, both Shanta and David have offered suggestions for additional goals, and what I'd love to do is throw it over to the two of you to talk about what you'd like added to our goal list.
Absolutely. Last select board meeting, I suggested that we actually enact the resolution of being a compassionate community and actually build the toolbox. So most of you remember last year in 2017, the Brattleboro Area Interfaith Initiative and the Brattleboro Area Interfaith Clergy Association, what a mouthful, were catalysts for bringing about resolution for the town of Brattleboro to join a national initiative in becoming a compassionate city. So last year the board approved. My suggestion was to add to this year's goals of making it an actionable item. So the goal would include, as I propose it, would include action items such as working with the original groups involved to establish a compassionate community task force or committee. And when I say task force, not anyone who would be policing anyone or anything, but coming together and actually helping to build our toolbox of what it actually means to be a compassionate town? Does everybody understand what that means? What are people's perspectives about that? The committee would do research on other models of compassionate cities and work with the town of Brattleboro and others to make recommendations. The committee would work based off of the restorative justice model and help resolve matters within the community through the lens of compassion. This committee might also include individuals from across sectors so that there's a broad representation and involvement. A member or members of the select board partnering with the task force or committee to suggest tools and or stay informed about tools that might be provided to the whole community to help us actually enact living the compassionate city that we say we are. So my suggestion was just to be who we say we are and actually move to the next level of operationalizing this resolution.
David, do you want to tell us what yours were, and then we'll have a discussion about
Yeah.
all of them?
Well, that was one of mine. It
Yeah.
it was to develop a plan for implementing it. And I think a subcommittee would be great. A great way to start. A couple of mine were on previous plans, or on previous goal lists, and they were not included this time. The first one was payment in lieu of taxes, which is an acronym for getting money from nonprofits or educational or health-related institutions that either by their initial charter or by legislation from the state or by their educational, by statute, they don't have to pay property taxes. And but they do, some of them consume a lot of services, and for the last several years, we've talked about different ways to go about this. And one idea that I had raised a few years ago was to have at least police and fire department, and maybe other departments, keep track of the services that they perform for these sorts of institutions, so that we could at least have some idea of what percentage or how many dollars or how many hours or some measure of how much of the town's resources are consumed by these institutions that don't really provide any revenue to the town. And the idea would be to then maybe go talk, well, I didn't really take it much beyond that, but to go talk with them to make it apparent to the community that that's the situation. Or there may be funding organizations that, like there might be some private foundation that funds mental health services or is really interested in primary care or something and would give the town a grant to help cover the costs of the services that we provide them. If we don't have any data, if we don't have any information about it, all we know is that we have a problem, but really no way to go with that. And that idea sat around for a few years, and I sort of concluded that, well, since it didn't go anywhere, it probably wasn't a very good idea. And I was hoping that some other idea would come along, but nothing has. So since we just upgraded our computer system, and we really haven't talked about additional revenues, trying to find additional revenues in a long time. And this is an area where I think we should at least explore it by finding out what the circumstances are, to get some real information on what, how much the non-profit or the non-property tax paying sector of our economy consumes of the cost of town services. So that I wanted to put that back on with that specific recommendation, although, be up to everybody whether they want to do that or not. The second one was to identify places that are most amenable to program-based budgeting, which is budgeting where you actually look at the cost of the additional program, like whether it's removing snow from the streets or whether it's recreation programs, a variety of programs that the town runs, to see if where our money is going is where we want it to go. Department-based and the model that we use now doesn't really make that as apparent as it could. And this is something that, again, it came up probably 5 years ago, and people were very interested and wanted to pursue it, and I think there are a couple of examples where we've been able to do that. But it's now off the goal list, and I wanted to put it back on and see if it could be rejuvenated, at least to the point of maybe dismissing it as not the best model because things can't be really organized based on programs. But rather than just have it fall off the list, I'd like just to at least decide to take it off the list instead of it just to go away. And then we just talked for an hour and a half about or an hour anyway, about the utility funding model, and but that's unnecessary because the recommendation is way smarter than talking about it, and we're gonna anyway, so we don't really need that on there. With the energy sustainability, I just wanted to be really explicit about what's the next upgrade gonna be, how much we're gonna put in next year's budget, which we'll start talking about in a few months, to do the next upgrade. Rather than, to look at those audits, which I don't know if everyone has seen them or not, or seen that report, but there are things on the list, and we've approached, or we've made progress on several of them, but there's still a whole bunch left. So I wanted to get that concretely on the list. And then housing and economic and community development, they all really lump together. I just read about an arts conference where I think if it wasn't the first thing, it was the second thing on the list in terms of holding back the continuing growth of the arts economy is availability of housing. And we hear it from the economic development people, that people can't find housing when they come here, they can't find the right housing. We know that there's a homeless issue. We know we have a 1% vacancy rate in town. There are very few building sites left in town. And it's in our goals, it's in our plan. I won't go through, but I found at least a half a dozen just in the first 4 or 5 sections of the plan where housing is mentioned in specific areas of the town plan. And it even came up in the, no, it didn't. It didn't come up in the parking study, but it's going to be. So anyway, I just thought that we should talk about, is there anything for the town to do, really, other than approve grants and accept things, or should we really be trying, or at least look like there may be some housing created by the museum. There's the snow building is in the works. What else do we need? What do we need, and what should the town be doing? It's nothing we ever specifically, directly talked about. And the compassionate community is already there. And then the last one, staff diversity, is to develop a day work program for the homeless and the panhandlers in town. The sun's out, it's warming up again, and it's like winter's gone, and now we're back in the exact same situation, and I don't think we have directly or consciously done anything about that. I know that the different departments are working on it, but that was one of the things we talked about. It's a tough thing to do.
And it's on the goals.
Oh, it is?
Yep. It is. Exactly where you wanted it too.
Oh, excellent.
Like yours.
Okay. Oh, no, that says continue efforts.
But
And the reason, I wrote it as develop. Do it and implement it.
Well,
We didn't put anything in the budget for it, so I don't know, unless we find money somewhere else. I have an idea about that too. I want it to happen. I want it to happen as
Well,
soon as possible.
we have to make sure it can happen, though.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, obviously, but it needs to happen. And there are models, so we'll see. So that's my list.
Okay, Tim and Brandy, do you have anything to add? And then we'll just go and talk about all this
I think
stuff.
I'm good with just talking about
Okay.
what Tim, if he has something to add.
No, but I have comments on the.
I have comments on the,
Okay.
Say, yeah.
Who wants to comment first? Tim or Brandy? I have comments too, but I'll let you
Brandy
guys
does?
go first.
Okay. Brandy does.
Do it alphabetically.
I am totally on board with what Shanta said completely. I mean, for me, I would sign on to that and fine with it on the goals. The pilot program that, which is the acronym for payment in lieu of taxes for those in the listening audience, I do have interest in that. I, of course, am cautious not to want to have interest in that blankets the entire nonprofit community, because we certainly have some that have more resources than others, but I'm sure you were already thinking that. Mm-hmm. Housing, I'd be very interested in speaking of, probably for me, more on the side of housing opportunities, land use rights for something for our homeless population, keeping in mind that at the beginning of the meeting I mentioned that the shelter closed. We had approximately 35 people who slept there for the entire winter and now are sleeping not there. So, at some point, shipping that many people out into the town is a little unsustainable. And I think at some point we need to say to ourselves, wow, we have almost 40 people, and those are the ones we know about, who sleep nowhere, which means they sleep somewhere. They camp, they're on the benches, they're in the gazebos, they're somewhere because they're humans, and at some point we have to stop moving our bodies and fall asleep. So I would say figuring out and admitting to ourselves that we have a lot of people who don't have a home, and that maybe some of our issues would be a little bit easier to work on, like a day work program or treatment, if people had a place where they could lock a door, lay down, take a nap, take a shower, and feel like their stuff was secure. Bring their nervous systems down a little bit, and then we can start talking about real things. So that rant aside, I'm interested in talking about your housing goal. And that's all I have to say.
Tim?
I'll start with what I like the idea of is talking about what role the town might play in housing initiatives and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great idea. And I think just to remind myself and the rest of the board, these are goals that are kind of loose that we're agreeing to talk about. To me, it's a little strange because we're kind of talking about things that we definitely want to accomplish, like the regional economic hub discussions, which I think are very important. That's on the top of my list. And then other things, sort of just groups of things we want to start talking about. So I'm, with something like your idea, Shanta, I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of throw excitement behind it because I'm a little bit reticent to create a town committee that I don't really understand what they would be doing. Town committees have legal obligations. They have to have open meetings. They have to take public records, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me like it's more...
What if we can partner with them? I mean, there are more than one ways for groups to form. And I already know of people who want to form the group. It's just a matter of us agreeing that it would be towards our goal to actually do something to enact a resolution, which now isn't living or breathing, and a lot of people don't remember it. So it's just a matter of, could we partner? We don't have to be the ones to sign off, but maybe we can be in partnership with whatever group would be formed.
Right. Well, I was just the reason I meant, like, what are these goals? I was just saying that I certainly don't mind talking about it, but if people are looking for sort of opinions on whether it's a good idea, my opinion would be it's a much better thing to put it together as more of a citizen group or work it through the Brattleboro Community Justice Center, which is already right here in this building doing really good work. And I don't necessarily think personally that creating a committee would automatically make us more compassionate as a community.
I didn't say that.
So, no, I'm not saying you said that, but it's just, that's how I would frame it. Like, that's not the action item for compassion to me is not necessarily that. So that was, and what was the other thing? I think for me, and as Kate really loves to say all the time, these are just things we're going to work on, right? It's not necessarily everything we're going to accomplish or get done. Like, I have a personal project that I'd like to have us discuss, and it's coming up on an upcoming agenda, about fixing what I see as a serious problem with our voting, with absentee ballots and with write-in votes. We need to address that, I think. But it doesn't need to be a select board goal, I think, because I don't know, it's just, that's just my opinion. I don't think it needs to be a goal. I think the last thing I'll say is that inside financial, if we're talking about pilots, we're talking about new funding revenues, I think if you're going to add that to the goals, I would like to add looking at the 1% option tax once again, because we are desperate to look for ways to fund, and I'm getting that look.
Well, no, it's because I tried 3 times. And every time somebody that had been here for a couple of years and saw the first ones fail, just looked at me and gave me that smile and said, go for it, we'll try it again.
Well, that's not how he's looking at you right now.
Oh.
He's Got excitement and vigor.
I'm excited to hear that you support the measure.
Oh, we tried, yeah. I mean, we do need the revenue, no question.
You have a new board here, don't you?
It's not us. The town has to
Town
approve
meeting.
it.
I understand. Well, certainly we shouldn't have a financial discussion about new revenue sources without talking about the 1% option, regardless of how you feel about it as a board member.
I'll
or a
make
town
sure that's
member.
vacation week.
Wow. Okay.
I would support that discussion.
And, no, I didn't mean to imply that you were saying that.
Yeah, I was just saying, basically, I look at plans, and plans are static, and they don't do anything. You know, you can sign off on a resolution, but and I've talked with people about it, just, oh yeah, we signed off on a resolution, becomes a compassionate town. And the answers are, well, what does that mean? Oh, we did? And so I'm very interested if they're, again, the original, and I'm not gonna volunteer them, there's still, we'd have to talk to them, of course, but the people who originally were involved can also be involved with being, whether it's a citizens group or, and whether it's one of, I would volunteer to still, be the liaison, however we do it, so that we can enact what we say we want to be. Because I'm interested in that. Like, we've voted to do that. Now let's look at what other compassionate towns are doing. And how are we engaging other people in these conversations? And what are the toolboxes and tools? And how do we work across different departments to enact that in different ways? And this is not to say it'd be resolved by the end of the year either. It's just something to work towards. And that it wouldn't just be on our shoulders, but there are, groups of people who'd be interested.
So if I understand you correctly, you're thinking more of a town with a small t, citizen committee,
Yeah.
made up of people who already did the existing research on the nationwide movement and brought this to us in the first place, maybe others, that would do research to see if there are guidelines to bring us in line with the national movement, and that there may be a select board liaison that goes to some of these meetings.
Yeah, and that they would be the ones helping to give us tools. Maybe they would be doing community conversations, and there are actual real things. There have been situations that have happened in town where, I would suggest, well, go talk to this group to see what they'd like to do. And the group would say, no, we don't want to handle that situation. So maybe, the citizens group, small t, would be the group to say, well, how can we help in this situation? And that's why I use the example of restorative justice. And so yes, that articulates very well what I'd like to see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can go ahead. I want to say something too.
Sure. I was just going to suggest that whatever group is already meeting, and I think you've been to a few of the meetings,
Yeah.
that maybe they could, by all means, let's add it to the goals, but let's invite them into that.
Absolutely.
conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's not only this conversation that we need to bring the people in that are already working on it, but it's the same with the housing conversation. Bring the people in that are already working on it. As opposed to us making stuff up that
Bring
when
the experts
somebody's
in.
already doing it.
Absolutely.
And, Peter is on this, or has gone to these meetings, and there is a group that's working on this.
Right.
Yeah, and get the Windham Windsor Housing Trust to come in with, and there's resources that we already have.
The timing is actually really good as far as the group that's already meeting. So as the conversation was unfolding and it became clearer to me that you were talking about sort of leveraging what's already happening to become more visible and more impactful in the community. The timing is perfect for that because on May 18th, and it's a meeting I actually wasn't going to be able to attend. I have gone to many, but not all of their meetings. But there's the group that has grown out of the Interfaith Initiative that is working on compassion-related issues is doing an exercise to plan how to be more specific with the actions that group can take to spread this message and create compassionate action in the community. So, far be it for me to
Right, of course.
presume to say,
Yeah.
hey, select board member,
Yeah,
would you
yeah.
please, but since it's evolved in this manner,
Right.
the timing is just perfect because that's the sole purpose of the next meeting. And because it's May 18th when I'm not able to attend, if
And
you
I
want to
may-
leap in with both feet, that would be great.
Yeah, and I know I'm not pulling this out of my hat. Of course, I have a friend who's been involved with this too, so I've been doing my homework, and if I can't do it, I'm sure, but I'm more than willing to.
Sure. And you and I can talk
Yeah.
outside of the meeting
Absolutely.
in terms of, what I've, picked
Yeah.
up from the year that I've
Of
been
course.
intermittently involved.
Yeah.
I'd like to participate in that too. If anybody else does, we'd have to warn it, but
Yeah.
there's no reason not to.
Right.
So if you could send the information about when that is,
Absolutely.
or tell me right now. Like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's May 18th. I can give you both the details of it, and actually, I think it would be helpful to you if the three of us have a meeting
Be great.
where I
Yeah.
can provide some perspective on what the group has been working on this year
course.
and how they're looking forward. Great.
Does anyone else want to say something before I say something? So it sounds to me that under the financial, if we want to just keep pilot on the list and collect data so we don't lose it, and say additional revenue possibilities, including 1% local option sales tax. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And then,
Ma'am,
yeah.
to the specific nature of that.
Yeah.
So the reason that we haven't made more progress on the pilot matter is because that data collection piece proved to be pretty complicated in terms of both how you define whose call you're responding to, who's the cause of a call, and you certainly don't want to discourage certain institutions from calling for help because they really need it. And so we could take a deeper dive into that in some future night as a topic, if you'd like, with folks who actually lived through that. But that happened shortly before I arrived, so it was probably somewhere between 3 and 4 years ago that an actual effort was undertaken. And it was found to be really cumbersome and time-consuming and not very valuable. So what I was hoping, we haven't really done anything much with it since then, what I was hoping we might do to learn more about how to get at this pilots issue and see if there's something we can do that we haven't been doing in terms of our relationship with the larger nonprofits, is on June 12th, we'll have the first meeting of the Regional Economic Hub Committee statewide. Thank goodness, finally. So when that happens, we get moving with that work, there's going to be a bunch of different ways in which we learn from other larger communities around the state that deal with many of these same kinds of issues. And that, I was hoping that we actually might make some progress this year related to the pilot by learning from that.
Yeah, it's good.
So if the board wants to put on pilot to make sure we don't lose track of that, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I would ask that you not be so specific as to say right now that the tool is, or the action is going to be to go do the data collection.
That's fine. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we want to identify areas to expand program-based budgeting. Did we try that before too?
Yeah. So that one, actually, I've got more fingerprints on. Actually, there's a reference to it in the results from this year that might be the best way, rather than trying to just come up with it out of my head. On the fourth page of your backup for this tonight, page 1 of 2 of the summary of how we did this past year, number 4 under financial matters, this is what I wrote as the outcome from this year of trying to take actions in a more programmatic context. We are doing better at this when we plan, budget, execute with a long-term perspective, which we're doing more of. We do not do well at this when we are addressing emergency situations. Changing to a program budget format will not be practical in the foreseeable future, but through the longer-term perspectives of the CRTO and the long-term financial plan, and through our work on the annual budget increasingly being summarized in programmatic terms, we're making progress on the cultural shift that is the foundation of the site, and we're making progress on framing issues in a more programmatic way. If the board can tolerate a slow pace in this transition, I think we can achieve the goal of continuing to challenge ourselves to think about big decisions in longer-term perspective and programmatic terms. Switching to actually, take our line item budget and turn it into something that's more of a program budget is an enormous undertaking that I don't think we have the resources and time for because of the variety of other, sort of street-level impact things that we're trying to do.
No, I think you said it really well here, and I don't know why this didn't make it into my memory when I read it. But this is working toward the goal. And I think the thing that gave rise to it was the need for more long-term planning and for a review of operations. And so, obviously it's being implemented. It does need to be on the list.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, and we just did the modeling, the utility budget thing.
Yep.
And then the energy and sustainability, I think we're all on board just to keep identifying the upgrades for 2020. We're always looking at that.
Yep.
And then the housing and economic and community development, what's our role? And the thing I think we have to keep in mind with all of this stuff, and this is gonna be the compassionate community conversation as well, the bandwidth capacity of the town staff when you have these conversations. And I don't want people on the select board to get frustrated that we're not gonna have the conversation at the next meeting, because we have to, we got in this problem like a year or so ago where we were doing all this stuff and we sort of lost our eye on the prize of what we were supposed to be doing as a select board. You know what I mean? So I just want us to all be aware that unless we're gonna meet till midnight every night.
I agree.
And we did almost a couple times last
And it
year,
almost
and that
killed
was
us.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I don't see, just to respond to that a little bit, I don't see this as a contradiction to what you said.
Yeah.
I think that what we haven't done is make housing a priority, but I keep seeing it over and over in every report, in every economic analysis, in every cultural, in every community analysis, it comes up. And I think it needs to be much higher on, it needs to take up some bandwidth. Now it doesn't take up any. Well, it does take up some because we approve
right.
grants and things.
But to me, it's making sure that we're looking at resources that are already there to come in and give us the information that we need, as opposed to having like Peter have to do all kinds of analysis. You know what I mean? Just using what we got.
Yeah, we should be directing them to what we want to hear, right? Like
Right,
the people
getting-
that are already doing the
Right,
work.
get them to
like,
come in and
Can you
talk to
come in and
us.
give us a report about homeless housing or about
Yeah,
whatever housing?
Yeah.
And what
that
really
I'm less-
is the need?
that's right.
And
That'll
where
help
could
us.
we
Totally.
apply our, whatever resources or
that
support
we
we can?
have.
to
It should
Yeah.
not
improve
land
it.
on the town staff squarely on their shoulders.
No, we need to just find the right people. And to me, that's
Yeah.
economic and community development is the
Yeah, I
same
just want to
thing.
get it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And now, Shanta, would you, this is my personal suggestion here, is either using the words, like develop plan for implementing compassionate community resolution, or, developing a plan to enact the resolution for being a compassionate community, and just use that one line as a goal, as opposed to saying, this is how we're gonna do it. 'Cause I
Yeah, we
think-
can use that one line as a
Okay.
goal, and piggybacking on what Randy said, I mean,
Right.
again, I have a line in to people who are already
Yeah.
working on this, and the meeting will have it. I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity for
Yeah.
people to come in throughout the year and
Yeah.
tell us what, exactly,
Yeah.
and I'd be more than willing to,
Yeah.
like I said, be
Yeah.
involved as much as I can.
And when you go to that first meeting, if you folks go to that meeting, there can be some takeaways that you can come and bring back to us. And perhaps
Absolutely.
And perhaps they need to come to our meeting.
Absolutely.
And you know what I mean? And then we can figure out, it's the same approach to the housing economic development.
Of
Is
course.
figure out what's happening.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and yes,
We can be
agree,
at the table.
yes.
Yep.
So we're gonna vote on this
Or do you-
next meeting? Or?
Yeah, we'll put it together and we'll look at it one more time. Does that make sense? Type it up so we know what we're all voting on.
Type it up nice and fancy.
Yeah.
Help.
Can I run over what I think you
Yeah.
Always
I have
a good
it.
idea.
rallied around?
Yeah,
So
I have it.
on the financial matters, would be including a reference to pilots and the 1% option tax.
Yep.
The energy efficiency and sustainability will be specific, basically building off of that number 1 that's already there, talking about continuing to implement what was recommended in the audits. That will be specific about that in the FY20 budget. We also add to that same section the discussion of housing, and that you intend to address that by engaging with the community. And that we'll add an item that's going to be enacting our resolution of being a compassionate community, building the toolbox
Absolutely.
as one of the goals.
And then economic community development. What
And
goes
economic and
down?
community development, same as the housing in a cluster.
Yeah.
That you want to address
It's
those
all- it's
topics
so
with the community.
interrelated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is one topic.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you.
One massive
Yeah,
topic.
we'll write that up, and it'll be in your backup again for next time. And if we don't nail the wording the way you want it,
We
then
can wordsmith it.
change it. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And the
guys.
day work program stays, it's already there.
Yep. Okay, last meeting, how can I say it nicely? We didn't have any volunteers to be the select board representative to the Windham Solid Waste Management District. Since last meeting, we've actually had volunteers who would be happy to represent the town at the Solid Waste Management District. And we always like it when people like wave their hands and volunteer.
Yeah.
Two of them are right here. Patrick just waved again. Would you like
Very
to speak to
excited.
that, Patrick? Because I know you volunteered and we appreciate it.
Sure.
And you're experienced at it too, which I think
Yeah.
is helpful.
Yeah.
Certainly. So, I guess I first became aware of the solid waste district upon
How many years
arriving
ago?
to Vermont in 1996. Didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it until such times I started working for the town and got really involved in the development of the general fund budget. And that led me to spending some time at the district probably in 2012, 2013 timeframe. Spent a number of years attending their meetings, I would say irregularly, but certainly many, many, many times, and have been active in investigations at the district in terms of, how they structure their programs and how in which they construct their budgets for the last several years. And I'm aware that there's a need for a town representative, and so I'd be happy to serve in that capacity.
I'll be happy to back him up.
Great, great, yeah,
We'll be happy to have you.
yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks. It's nice to have people at the meetings that can speak the language, so to speak. You know what's going on, so that's extremely helpful.
Language of waste.
Yes.
Nice, Tim.
Would we like to, does anyone have any questions about appointing Patrick or Peter? Are there any volunteers in the public that would want to compete with Patrick and Peter for being our representatives on the Windham Solid Waste District? All right, seeing none, would either Tim or Brandy like to make a motion to appoint Peter Elwell, or Patrick Marland as our representative to the Windham Solid Waste Management District, and Peter Elwell as the alternate to the Solid Waste Management District?
I'll make that motion as stated.
All right, we have a motion to appoint Patrick Moreland as our representative to the Windham Solid Waste Management District, and Peter Elwell as the alternate. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 3-0. And thank you both very, very much. We appreciate it.
Yes, very much. So.
We are finally at new business, and Steve Barrett is coming back to talk to us about some Vermont Agency of Transportation matters. A lot of approvals of things.
The first item I have for the board is the adoption of the annual financial plan after town meeting. This is supposed to be submitted within 60 days. And what it does is it helps determine the amount of funding that the town receives from the state. We actually get a yearly reimbursement of about $250,000. So I'm seeking your approval that confirms that we spend at least $300 per mile of roadway in Brattleboro.
Which we know to be true.
That's what it actually asked for, which is like $20,000, and our capital paving is $250 alone. So you do commit $300 per mile.
Yeah, and this is a form that VTrans makes us send.
That's correct.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for Steve about this? What this means? Does anyone in the public have any questions about why we're signing a form saying we spend over $300 on our roads?
For a mile.
Does anybody on the board want to make a motion, since no one seems to have any questions about this?
Are we grouping them together, or?
Well, let's just go one by one so we can,
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the annual financial plan town highways form for submittal to the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
we have a motion to approve the annual financial plan, town highways form. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. One person's out of the room. Next up is the certificate of compliance for the
Okay,
Agency of Transportation.
The certificate of compliance for the town road and bridge standards and network inventory required by the Vermont Agency of Transportation. Adoption of the certificate of compliance results in additional funding from VTrans grant projects and eligibility for FEMA reimbursement. So we have an approved town road and bridge standard and network inventory, so we're asking you to approve this.
Does anyone on the board have any questions about this? Does anyone in the public have any questions? Would someone on the board like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the annual certification of compliance for town road and bridge standards and network inventory form for submittal to the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
We have a motion to approve the annual certification of compliance for town road and bridge standards and network inventory. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next up is this state highway paving grant. Is that next?
I have, the first one is a Class 2 paving grant for a section of Maple Street for $117,205 with a local funding match of $23,441, which is 20% of the project cost. This is a VTrans grant for improvements to Maple Street to pave it. So I'm seeking your approval for that
From
grant.
Guilford Street extension up the hill.
As far as we can go with $117,000, which should bring us to, from Guilford Street to the worst
John's
sections over towards Fairview.
Right to
Yeah.
John's house. Yeah. Stop right before. And you
Yeah,
want to
stop
talk,
this before
about the other ones too?
Sure.
Because I think we're going to make one giant
Yep.
motion on this one.
The second one is a Class 2 grant to pave a section of Hinesburg Road for $97,340 with a local funding match of $19,468, which again is 20% of that total. And then the third item is actually a structures grant, and that's to replace a failing box culvert on Hinesburg Road for $172,200 with a local funding match of $17,200, which is 10% of the total project cost.
And these were all anticipated projects, correct?
These are all anticipated projects. We know that probably the structure grant will most likely be in a good shape to be eligible for that. And these other two, we're going to put our name into these, and hopefully if we don't get the total amount, we may receive a percentage of the total, and we'll accept whatever we can get.
All right, anyone on the board have any questions? About these grants? Anyone in the public have any questions about our paving grants? Would someone on the board like to make a motion?
I move we approve that applications be submitted to the Vermont Agency of Transportation for the following grants. A paving grant in the amount of $117,205 for paving Maple Street. A paving grant in the amount of $97,340 for paving Hinesburg Road. And a structures grant in the amount of $172,200 for a culvert on Hinesburg Road.
All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Steve.
And just a quick note, if I may, we are going to be paving East Orchard Street, and there's been a lot of public feedback because a lot of people don't realize that East Orchard actually starts on Upper Dummerston Road, and there's a paved section next to the country club, and then
Yep.
it turns to a gravel road
Yep.
from Gibson Road to Orchard Street.
Yep.
So I've received a lot of calls, don't pave that gravel road.
And
So
we're not going.
People are under the impression that we are going to pave that. We are not going to pave the gravel section. We're only going to pave the existing paved section of roadway.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of opposition if you ever want to try to pave that gravel road.
I'll never try.
If you pave it, make it 4 lanes, because it's gonna be super high.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
We can go home now. Next up is the proposed settlement of Marcraft versus Town of Brattleboro, and the town manager will tell us all about this.
I will very briefly summarize this. It's a matter that has been in litigation, and so the board is very well aware of the details. But for the purposes of the public, I'll just say that most often when there is a dispute about value, it gets resolved before actually going to court. But sometimes property owners actually exercise their right to take the town to court to try to obtain a lower property value for tax purposes on our grand list. In this case, Marcraft Realty Corporation, the owners of the outlet center near Exit 1 up on Canal Street, did that and made a good case for themselves of, they thought the value was closer to $1.3 million. We had a value closer to $2 million. In the course of the litigation, we actually had independent appraisals conducted, and the value came in a little higher than the 1.3. The town's, the appraisal that the town obtained was at $1.36 million. And so through the course of negotiations between the parties, we've agreed on a settlement that will establish for this year and the 2 following years, which is the way it's set forth in the statutes when you have a resolution of this type, that the value for that property will be $1,350,000. That stipulation has been signed by the representatives of Marcraft Realty, and we're asking the board tonight to authorize me to sign it on behalf of the town.
Does anyone on the board have any questions about this? Does anyone in the public have any questions? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move to authorize the town manager to execute a stipulation to assessed value with Marcraft Realty Corporation in the amount of $1,350,000 for property ID number 00340035.000 at 580 Canal Street.
We have a motion to authorize the town manager to execute a stipulation of assessed value with Marcraft Realty Corporation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next up is the downtown parking study, and we're going to have Rod Francis.
Okay.
And we're doing this in advance of our discussion of the parking budget, which will occur on
May 15th.
May 15th.
2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah.
Right around the corner.
So we're hoping that this might inform
Right.
some of our decisions.
Pizza's so bad.
Good evening, I'm Rod Francis, I'm the planning director, and with me tonight is Andy Joe from Desmond Associates, and he's going to present on the parking study that we have conducted for the downtown. The project was funded by a municipal planning grant, and we did it as part of the process for doing a downtown master plan. And this was to resolve issues associated with development of public facilities downtown, and also to explore ways in which we could improve public parking facilities downtown. So without too much further ado, as soon as I get this PowerPoint up, which is where
Shifted according to the date modified. You may very well have transferred the wrong one.
That's okay. Do you have your laptop?
I do.
Okay, that's all right. So while Andy's just pulling out the right file here, you can turn to the report that you've got a copy of in the packet. And if you've got any questions, you can either ask Andy or I while we're getting set up. Maybe as part of background, I can.
Well, I think one of the takeaways when we don't have it is there are more parking spaces in Brattleboro than I think people think there are.
Certainly, there are far more parking spaces available downtown than most people think there are. Yes. And so what we have is a mismatch between where people think the parking is and where the parking actually is. So it's not a infrastructure problem. It's not a number of spaces problem. It's a relationship between where people habitually park and where the parking is available.
Right. So in some ways, I think the study is it's a positive in a way that we're not lacking spaces. We just might not be using them right or educating people where they are.
Right, and if you mean by educated that if that's a euphemism for changing their behavior by changing the pricing, yes, we could educate people.
I was thinking more like better signage.
Right.
Oh,
This
no.
way to that parking lot, that way to that parking lot.
I think that part's,
Were in the room.
that part's been recently improved and is actually fairly good. I think it's, if you really want to park outside Amy's while you're having a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock in the morning, as is everybody else, that'll cost you. If you were to park in the Harris Street lot at the same time and walk to Amy's, which is all of 2 blocks, then it won't cost you very much at all. Right?
What about handicap parking on Main Street? When I say that, what is your insight on that? Because that is one area that I've gotten several complaints about.
It's interesting. It's interesting because Vermont's an interesting state with regards to that.
Yeah.
Vermont does support the issuance and use of placards to identify vehicles authorized to park in handicap parking spaces. But you actually, excuse me, you actually have laws on the books which allow anybody with a placard to essentially deem any parking space as accessible or usable here. So they can, if you have a handicap placard, you can park in any public facility, in any public space in the state of Vermont for up to 24 hours without incurring charge or citation, as long as you are not violating some sort of life safety statute.
Like don't park in front of the fire hydrant.
Yeah, parking in front of the fire hydrant will get you towed. But anything outside of that.
So somebody could park in that coveted Amy spot at 9 in the morning who has a handicap
and
placard and enjoy their coffee.
Leisurely coffee all day long.
Leisurely coffee all day long.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a state statute. So, I mean, in terms of the number of spaces that you have supplied within your facility, you're certainly within current ADA regulations in terms of compliance. Locations appear all to be compliant with ADA regulations. As far as the number of spaces, it's hard to make a ruling on that because there could be, it's dependent on the number of placards rather than designation.
Do you want to start now, the presentation?
Oh, here it is. Very nice. Thank
We'll
you
get
for
back
that, by
on.
the way. Thank you.
That was a good question.
So in deference to Ms. O'Connor's statement here, there are about 2,300 parking spaces in downtown Brattleboro, and that number may surprise folks. It may be surprising in part because about 52% of those are actually held in private parking facilities scattered across the downtown district here. The spaces that people most often think about and they're most often competing for are that 9% of on-street parking spaces, which only amount to about 200 of them across the entire downtown district here. And those are the ones that are most coveted and sought for. Those are the ones that folks are usually looking for, most specifically along Main Street between Grove and Elliott here. You have about 715 spaces that are in publicly accessible, publicly owned facilities. The largest concentration of that is in the transportation garage, but you have a series of surface lots across the downtown that are fairly well distributed for the downtown as far as access to major destinations. And then you have a small contingent that we call public-private facilities here. These are facilities that are in publicly held lands, but they're actually designated exclusively for private use, permit use only, employee parking only. And there may be an opportunity to look at establishing different signage and different usage agreements here to open some of that capacity up to after-hours use by the general public, which would go a long way toward addressing perceptions of inadequate parking in the downtown district. In terms of occupancy, we went out and did formal occupancy counts about this time last year here. Long story short, across the district here, the highest utilization we saw was about 67% of effective supply. And I jumped over that, so let me rewind that very quickly. 2,314 striped parking spaces in the downtown district. For planning purposes, we usually take a percentage of that off of the table. And we do that artificial reduction to reflect the impact that you could have from snow cover after a snow event here, where you're actually losing a certain number of spaces because there's snow piled up in the corners. The gentleman or lady who drives into town in a very large SUV and decides that they need one parking space for each wheel. And so you get some lost capacity there as well. The use of effective supply accommodates for those losses and gives you a measure to really determine whether an area is starting to get to a point where it may be perceived as full, even though there may be a few available spaces here. So that magic number is 2,115, that reduced effective supply number. That's the number we use to evaluate what we saw in the field. In the field, the peak utilization we saw was about 67% on a June weekday. That was at noon. It was 902 spaces on the following Saturday here. In terms of general utilization, about 59% of the supply was utilized on a weekday. It was about 52% on average across the course of the weekend day. There were packets where you did have very intensive utilization. Up and down Main Street between Elliott and Grove, the Harmony lot, the High Grove lot, all of those saw very heavy utilization here. So that's not to say that there isn't a lot of competition within the downtown area here for parking in certain places. But we didn't see any facilities that were perpetually overloaded all day long, with the exception of maybe the very small lot next to Whetstone Station, which frankly is completely undersized to serve that facility, which is why most of the patronage goes across the street to the Depot Street lot, which is the publicly owned lot across the way. We took that peak hour number and we overlaid that with an assumption of what development could be potentially in the pipeline. Because what we really wanted to do was stress test the system to see where we could potentially have issues in the future. Excuse me. And so the scenario that we actually ran was we assumed there were about 8,000 square feet of grade level retail space available
within that district there, up and down Main Street between Elliott and Grove. And that was just based on casual observation. And we assumed that that would get absorbed completely and it would most likely turn into restaurant, which seems to be the predominant use up and down, and is also the most intensive use when it comes to parking demand. So we wanted to come up with kind of a worst case scenario, if you will. We knew that we had about 20,000 square feet of vacant space in the Marlboro College building. So we assumed that that was going to get absorbed as well with a standard office use. Latches at the time, or Latches, which way did I get it right the second time?
Yep.
Okay, Latches. Had 2 restaurants that were in development when we were here this past fall, totaling about 4,000 square feet of space. So we wanted to include that into our scenario as well. We know that at some point, the Preston Street lot may be looked at as a development pad or an alternate use from what it is right now, which is a 58 space surface lot. So we factored that into our impact analysis. And in talking with the museum, they had indicated that they were looking at a parcel across the street from them that could hold as much as 5,000 square foot of exhibit and function space in the near future and up to 10 residential units. So we ran that through a standard set of demand ratios that are endorsed by the Urban Land Institute and the Institute of Transportation Engineers. These ratios are based on empirical observation of similar land uses in the field in order to develop the ratio between square footage and parking demand, or number of residential uses and parking demand. We ran that through, and what we found was this development could add up to 317 spaces worth of new demand across the downtown district. And we actually located that on the individual blocks we anticipated that this would occur on. And what we found was in Block 7, which is running between the river and Main from Elliott to Grove, which is already highly utilized, where you had new development, that was going to reach a point where you were going to be over capacity. The block directly north to that, which has some availability, would also get to a point where you were starting to get into a crisis level. You weren't necessarily over capacity, but you were starting to get to a point where things were going to get pretty pinched. The block at the very north or top end here is actually the block with Superior Court, and we know on the days that they impaneled juries, they were always pinched. There's always a huge issue. It's a very constrained block. There's almost no supply on it. That supply ends up spilling over into the adjacent streets. Now, that's not unusual. In every municipality you go into in America, it is very rarely to find a downtown where they have a perfect balance between the demand that exists within a given block boundary and the supply that exists within it. Usually what you have, very similar to what you have, is you have centralized sources of supply. So you have a transportation center surrounded by several blocks that are of a very intensive development, and that transportation center serves as the supply to cover those other blocks. So what we really were looking for, and what we were very cognizant of, is if we were looking at a scenario where an entire district through the middle of downtown had gone completely red or had gone completely yellow, where you're going to have a very hard time balancing that supply on the adjacent block, that's usually a good indicator that you may want to start building now in order to correct against that. We didn't see indicators of that. There are indicators that you're going to have to reach over into adjacent blocks to balance your supply and demand, but we didn't see an isolated cluster that couldn't be met by that. So initially the conclusion was we're not necessarily looking at a supply number, i.e. number of spaces. We're looking at some significant management issues, and that's to some degree the direction we focused our attention on. When we talk about management, the first concern that you always have is that the spaces just aren't turning over downtown. And that was, during the stakeholder conversations that we had, a number of people said, I had great concern that the spaces in downtown are not turning over. People are parking all day long. Mm-hmm. So we sent folks into the field, and we actually had them do license plate inventories here, where they walked up and down Main Street between Elliott and Grove on both sides all day long, and they wrote down the plate number of every vehicle that was parked there. And then they went back the following hour and they wrote down the plate number of every vehicle parked in the space. They went back and they did an analysis to determine how long the typical length of stay was, how often these spaces turned over. They did the same thing in the Harmony lot because we knew that that was very highly utilized and sought after as an asset as well. The good news is Harmony lot is on the left side, Main Street is on the right side. If you add up the percentage of folks that were parking for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours being the max in the Harmony lot, 96% of the people who parked during the survey day were compliant with the 3-hour time limit. Those spaces turned over about 4 times during the course of a 10-hour observation, which is good. That's a lot of turn, that's a lot of folks that are getting service. You do have a small percentage of folks who are staying longer than that, but that's not unusual. You almost never get 100% compliance in anywhere. Folks are always willing to roll the dice to some degree. On Main Street, again, 96% compliance. If you add up the percentage of folks that park for 1 hour, the percentage of folks that park for 2 hours, it's a 2-hour limit. 96% compliance as those spaces turned over 5 times in the course of a typical day. So the good news is you don't have a turnover or an enforcement problem. Those spaces are turning over. Most of your long-term parkers are parking off of the street or parking in areas that are less utilized, which is a good thing. That's the sign of a well-managed system. We also did an extensive stakeholder outreach and survey process here. It makes up about half of the report if you've had a chance to read it yet. If not, it's a wonderful sleep aid. We got about 1,000 responses back. As we went back and checked those, we had validated a little bit over 800. When we took a look at that percentage relative to the reported population for Brattleboro, it was statistically a reasonable representation from a gross numbers perspective here. So we could draw some reasonable assumptions from that. We did take a look at what the representation was relative to age and gender associated with the census. Your age census was a little bit higher than the responses. The responses were, for lack of a better term, a little bit younger, which was interesting, a little bit surprising. But we didn't feel that that invalidated any of the answers we got. We got a larger response from women than we got from men, and that's not unusual for parking. Just for whatever reason, and I can't typify it, women tend to respond to these more and have greater insight into the nature of parking in downtown district. 56% of the respondents identified themselves as within the zip code. So again, we felt like we got a pretty good response rate from the folks who would be actual residents in Brattleboro. When we asked folks to identify themselves, the strongest identifications that came back to us were shoppers, diners, and entertainers, and folks who were seeking entertainment in downtown. We also had a representation of folks who were employees and a representation of folks who identified themselves as residents first and foremost, but they were smaller numbers. This again seems to be fairly consistent with the population, patronage population that you have coming into downtown on a daily basis here. 83% of folks indicated that they came into town consistently by private vehicle, 13% by walking, 2% by biking, which again is fairly consistent with what you see in U.S. Census statistics. Now, getting to some of the more interesting meat of the takeaway. A little bit less than 200 curbside parking spaces in downtown represent only 9% of the total population. 57% of folks, when they're asked where they park when they typically come down, on-street parking spaces. So again, a lot of competition for that curbside or on-street parking, which again can lead to that perception that there's not available parking in downtown. You had about 23% who were trying to park in 9% of the spaces. You had 57% who said, I like to park in one of the off-street public spaces, which again represent 30% of the total supply. So again, a lot of competition for very limited assets and resources. One of the things we were very concerned about was the report that we're going to get back. We asked folks to identify what they would define as acceptable walking distance. This has a major effect in a downtown because if folks say, I expect to park in the same block that my destination is in, you're now looking at an expectation which says if you don't have supply and demand perfectly balanced on that block, you're going to have a lot of perceptions of parking issues here. Interestingly, we had a majority of folks that come back who indicated that they were very comfortable parking up to a block away, up to 2 blocks away, some of them even farther than 2 blocks away. There were a percentage of folks who said, I expect to be right at the front door. It's not unusual in any urban location or in any downtown period, you would expect to find that. But the preponderance of them actually indicated that walking a block, 2 block, was something that they were okay with, which means that you're not at least under the onus of trying to make supply and demand balance on every block. Vast majority of folks said, even when I come down the busiest time, I can usually find parking in 10 minutes or less. Over half of them said it was 5 minutes or less, which again is a pretty good performance rate. And the other question that we asked is if you came downtown and you couldn't find parking right at your destination, what would you do? And this is a response to a concern that we often hear from downtown merchants, that if folks come down, they can't find parking right in front of the store, they'll turn around and they go away. Very small percentage of respondents said, I will turn around and go elsewhere, I'm not going to try. Most of them said, I will park some distance from my destination and walk back, it's that important to me. This is great news for you folks. You've built a very dynamic, attractive downtown, and folks are willing to get over the very small barriers to access it. So you have a great value proposition. They're going to park at greater distance and they're going to walk because you've put together such a vibrant downtown. They want to be in it, even though there are some challenges they may not face going out to the suburban mall, for example.
Are you getting all this, Chris? The next thing we tested was we wanted to get a perception on the condition, the quality of the public facilities. Because very often when you go into downtown districts, people will say, well, I don't use any of the public facilities because they're dark, they're dangerous, they're in poor repair, etc. Overwhelming response was the facilities that the town is providing downtown for public parking are in average or better condition. We asked them to evaluate on quality of light, quality of paint, condition of facility. You got B+ or better marks on all of these going forward. So again, you have folks who are looking at your facilities and as a general rule, finding them to be more than adequate. That said, I will tell you there were a significant number of comments that said the garage feels dark to me, the garage feels dangerous to me, the garage feels dirty to me, and we do address that in the recommendations because we did hear that loud and clear. It's not unusual perception. I will tell you when your constituents approach you on this, if they're very concerned about this, direct them to the FBI website and they compile statistics annually on where crimes happen. And as a parking guy, I love this website because it validates what I've told folks time and again. The perception that parking garages are very dangerous is actually completely out of whack with where actual property and personal crimes occur. The FBI classifies where these occur and puts together this statistical report every year. And in point of fact, the place where you are in greatest danger is in your own home or in your neighbor's home. The same place you're in second greatest danger is typically on the street in front of your house. Only about 2% of all personal crimes and 3% of all property crimes actually happen within a parking facility, despite what Hollywood would have you believe. And in point of fact, I will tell you, the greatest way to create security within a parking facility is to create activity within a parking facility. The busier a parking facility is, the more commerce you have moving through there, the less likely you're going to have any type of issue, because the bottom line is folks who commit crime don't like to get caught, and they're not going to do it in some place that's busy and active. We also asked about the quality of signage and wayfinding. Was that good? Overwhelmingly, folks seem to be very satisfied with the quality of signage and wayfinding that you have in the downtown. There was a very strong support for biking and all things related to biking. A lot of desire to see better accommodations for bike parking, for bike sharing, for dedicated lanes as far as that goes. So there is the opportunity to get that 2% up to a higher level if the infrastructure is there and provided.
We talked a little bit about the idea of dynamic pricing, which is pricing relative to utilization, which we talked a little bit about. Not surprisingly, there was not a lot of appetite to see that happen wholesale. I believe the way we actually put it is, would you rather see lower rates and fixed time limits or higher rates and no time limits? And the vast majority of folks came back and said, we want to pay less and have fixed time limits. So it's not surprising. I've yet to go into a community that says, oh man, you want to raise rates? That's fantastic. We're so glad you're here. Nobody likes charging for parking. However, in a minute, I want to talk about why it is important to charge for parking and why you may want to consider a pilot and dynamic pricing here to distribute some demand among the assets that you've got downtown. Very strong support for single head meters if they were upgraded to accept multiple forms of payment.
Yeah.
Very strong support on that. We also asked, okay, as an alternative to that, would you be interested in a smartphone application that would allow you to pay through your smartphone? Not so much interest in that. Not overwhelming by any means here. One of the questions that we've slipped into the survey here that we thought was very telling is we had asked folks to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not a problem, 10 being a major problem. How would you rate the following issues or conditions? And the number one thing that came back were the meters only take coins. That was the biggest complaint that we heard from folks.
You have smart people here.
The next biggest complaint was lack of facilities and programs to support alternative transportation. A lot of interest in that. We didn't quantify if there was a lot of interest in that for myself or other people on the road, but there's a lot of interest in that, period. Not surprisingly, availability of parking spaces near popular destinations. You're going to find that in every downtown. There are only so many spaces at the front door. There were concerns about parking enforcement and ticketing. I hear that from time to time. I don't necessarily know that that's an actionable issue because the fact is, as it was shown in our survey of license plate inventories and turnovers, it's doing our job. It's doing its job, which is to create that turnover. So I'm not necessarily going to recommend to you that you pull back on that at this point. Finally, the fifth issue of concern, or the fifth down the list there, was the price of parking. And again, you're going to have that in any community, folks. There's nobody who says no to free parking. But again, it is a necessary thing to have in order to manage your parking. So we ended up grouping our concerns into one of two headings. And one of the headings was lack of availability on core downtown streets and some things that you could do to address that. One of them is to investigate differential pricing to create reduced usage and high occupancy block faces. And the way that this typically works is you do a pilot. It's usually short term, 6 months. You set clear metrics for what you want to achieve. When this has been done in other communities, typically metrics are along the line of we want to see an average of 85% occupancy on every block face. 85% occupancy is sort of the sweet spot because it means that your block is very vibrantly used, but there's 1 to 2 available spaces when folks show up. And those 1 to 2 available spaces are very critical because those are the spaces that your discretionary users want. And your discretionary users are anybody from out of town who's never come into town before but heard about a great restaurant downtown. How do we all find destinations in this day and age? We whip out our smartphone, we plug in the name, we get the address, and the GPS takes us right there. If the GPS takes us right there and they can find a parking space on the same block or the adjacent block, for the most part, this is a completely successful venture. They pulled up, they found parking fairly close, they got out of their car, they could see exactly where they were going to, they had a great time at the restaurant, they came back, and when they go home to their home community, they're going to tell you what a fantastic neighborhood, a fantastic downtown Brattleboro is. That's why you want those 1 to 2 available spaces at curbside. There is a percentage of folks who are going to be more familiar and more comfortable in your downtown and also price sensitive. So ideally what you want to do is you want to raise the rate on those highly used block faces just high enough and then lower the rates And this is the other half you have to do. You got to lower the rates in the underutilized assets to create an incentive for those folks who are price sensitive and a little bit more familiar with the downtown to say, you know what, I'm gonna go park over in the Harris lot today. I'm a little bit short on money, and create that 1 or 2 open spaces that you're looking for. I recommend a pilot because it's finite and it's defined. When you go in to do the pilot, you say, listen, we're looking to achieve 85% occupancy on average on Main Street between Elliott and Grove all of the time. And in order to achieve this, we're going to try raising the rates in those meters a quarter. And we're going to drop the cost to park in the Harris lot and High Grove lot by proportionally the same amount. And then we're going to publish this, and we're going to go out and we're going to take data every month to see how we're doing. At the end of that 6 months, we're going to come back to the public and we're going to report how we're doing. Was the pilot successful or not? If the pilot was too successful and your average utilization is 60% on the curbsides, then you're going to go back to the old rates. If you're still at 95% on the curbsides, another rate adjustment may be in order. It may not necessarily be another rate hike on those block faces. It may be an additional reduction on the Harris lot. But this is how progressive communities are now tackling this. Price changes are never popular with the public. They're far more popular with the public when they're finite defined and you can tell them why you're changing the price and what you're hoping to achieve. And then you can come back and actually report with clear metrics whether you achieved it or not. This is not something, by the way, that's not just done in Boston, San Francisco. This was done in Burlington, Vermont, in their downtown district, and was very effective. We talked a little bit about these public-private assets that are publicly owned but privately utilized at least part of the day. One of our recommendations is to look at the potential of installing signage outside of these to make folks aware that these public assets are available to them on off hours. A sign can make a world of difference. We were walking through the garage today and noting that there were some of the signs on some of the spaces in the garages, and they state things like transit use. Now, I know, because I'm from Brattleboro, nobody's checking to make sure if I park in one of those spaces whether I'm getting on a bus or getting on a train. But to somebody who's not familiar with that, they're not going to roll the dice. And if those are the only spaces that are available in the garage, they're going to either feel very uncomfortable using them or they're just not going to use them at all, and then they're going to report that you have a parking problem. So being able to put signage on those spaces that says these are the times that these uses are acceptable goes a long way to opening up those from a perception standpoint to the general public and making those available and giving you the perception of having abundant available downtown capacity. Another way you can do this is to look at shared parking arrangements. These are actually happening already in your community. When I talk to downtown residents, when I talk to downtown employees, and I ask them where they park, they'll tell you, oh, well, I park behind the bank during the off hours here, or I park in the church lot here. It's already happening. The nice thing about a shared parking agreement is it gives you a legal structure to protect all parties. So one of the biggest concerns you have is folks very often don't want to open up a private facility because they're worried about issues of liability. When you have a shared parking agreement in place, it defines and limits those issues of liability so that private property owner is not concerned about what happens if there's a slip and fall. They're not concerned what happens if somebody leaves their car overnight and the next day my employees show up and they can't park in that space, because it defines all of these. This is how we're going to deal with each one of these situations. Gives everybody a certain degree of comfort as far as that goes, and allows you to formally make these spaces available to different groups. There are lots of ways to do shared parking agreements. Sometimes the municipality is negotiating with a private party and they are operating that facility part of the time as a quasi-public facility. Sometimes it's a private party to a private party agreement and the municipality is just brokering that agreement as far as that goes. So there are a lot of ways to use this tool, but it's a tool that would get you more capacity. You have a webpage right now that gives you a lot of good information about downtown parking. It could give you more information about downtown parking and alternative transportation. there's not necessarily a central resource to go to find that information, so I can make some decisions as I'm coming downtown about what my options are. Getting that information out where folks can find it will help educate them on their different options, and may change some of the commuting patterns that you see coming in and out of downtown. The other area that we heard a lot of concern about is improving service to the constituents here. And there are a lot of fairly low-hanging fruit ways to address this. Swapping out the single head coin-only meters that you've got for smart meters that accept debit and credit cards is an immediately improvement. It will be very well received by the general public. The nice thing about these smart meters is not only does it give you the payment option, they also track data. So as you are trying to make decisions in the future about your parking system, it will tell you the days that are really busy, the days that are really slow, when people are buying more parking or less parking, and it will give you insight to those use and patterns so that you don't necessarily need somebody like me to come in and tell you how your parking operation is running. Pat will be able to pull that up and tell you at any time so that you can make very educated decisions going forward. Ditto with replacing the existing kiosks in the off-street facilities here. Again, it gives you the option to pay by form other than cash, and it also would give you some great information on how the system is doing. Talking about information, you put together an annual report right now every year as part of your total budget process on what's happening with the parking fund. There are a lot of misconceptions within the community about where the money that comes from parking goes and how it gets used. And that's not unusual. You will always hear from a certain contingent in every community that they'll tell you that writing parking tickets is a profit grab. Or that all of the parking funds that come in go into the general fund and then they get sluiced out to other places. In point of fact, you folks actually have the perfect structure from a parking analyst perspective here. All of your money gets funded, it goes into a fund, that fund goes to pay for parking improvements. Right now, all that money is going in to pay for the transportation center for the most part and your operating expenses associated with the parking fund. At some point, you will retire the debt service on that, and you may be able to do other things with that. When you get to the point where you are able to do other things with that, it's very important to make the public aware that that money is going toward things that actually benefit them, and to create some transparency. The Lexington Parking Authority does a wonderful job of it. You can see a picture of the annual report they put out. It's glossy, it's beautiful, it's 16 pages, and it's basically the Parking Authority telling all of the constituents who have put a coin in the meter in the last year, this is where your money went. So it's completely transparent so that you take that issue right off the table. When folks get a ticket, they're not looking at that and saying this is a money grab on the part of the city. They're saying, oh, this is funding flower boxes in downtown Lexington, or new park benches in Austin, or the bus pass system in Ann Arbor. These are all examples of places that take some of those excess money, put them to other uses, but are very loud about publishing that this is the benefit going back to the community. You were very concerned about the garage, and there are things that you can do to make that garage more inviting. Low-hanging fruit, simple things, treatments with refractive paint, especially on the ceiling or the floor. What that refractive paint will do is it'll take the natural illuminance that you have in the garage right now and it bounces it around. The biggest issue that you usually have in parking garages is not enough light, it's uniformity of light. Because what you have are cone of light right underneath the fixture and then a dark spot. Cone of light under the fixture and a dark spot. And what the eye sees is all of these places where a mugger could potentially hide.
Right.
When you get greater uniformity, it takes that off the table because you can see clearer. I know that you just relamped the garage with LED fixtures here. You could potentially supplement those with additional fixtures to get more illumination in. If you were going to do that, you could look at alternating them in more frequency than you have right now. I think they're in about every fourth tee right now, and you could go every other tee. Or right now the lights are all laid out at the end of the stalls so that half of the drive aisle is illuminated and half the stall is illuminated.
Yeah.
You could look at doing supplemental light down the middle so that all of the drive aisle is illuminated. Or you could do supplemental staggered lights where the existing lights are every 4, and then when you do the other 2, you're going closer to the outside so that you're spreading that light further out. That, combined with the refractive paint, again, is going to raise your illumination levels. It's going to get you more uniformity. And the general perspective is going to be that it is a brighter, more attractive, more welcoming facility. The only other things you can do, you're already doing, to be quite honest. You have personnel going through on a regular basis patrolling for parking enforcement. That's a win. Whenever you have people moving through there, again, activity is your friend. It makes people feel comfortable. When they see that guy coming around the corner, even if he's writing tickets, they know that there's somebody there. There's no way to really secure the perimeter of that. It's a public facility. So there's nothing I can make a recommendation as far as that goes in terms of securing stairwells, etc. You could put in panic lights. I will tell you that cuts both ways.
Sounds terrible.
Exactly, because the problem is you put those in, and you put those in so that people feel safer, and the first thing they do when they see those is go, "This is a dangerous place."
Yeah.
I will not advocate for CCTV throughout the facility. That actually raises bigger issues in liability than it is ever going to provide you in crime deterrence. So that's hopefully fairly brief, but still informative. If you have any questions, I'm happy to field those and respond to those at this time.
Thank you. May 15th, we're going to talk about the budget, so we don't want to talk about the budget now, but if anyone has specific questions about what we just heard that might help inform any kind of conversation we have in 2 weeks, this is the time to ask.
I do have questions about, because I did go up to Burlington, and I was so happy that I could choose. I stopped coming downtown because I hated running out of a place and throwing more money, or the meter is broken and, Harmony Lot. So what's the cost? Do you guys have any, what's the cost of the smart meter and replacing them?
We provided some information to Mr. Moreland here to start looking into that. I will tell you that we're basing our costs off of a collective procurement process that the Eastern District of Massachusetts Planning Group did. And those are fairly close to what you can expect to get in the process. Those heads are going to run you $450, $500 a crack if you buy them straight out. Now, that said, there are any number of vendors that will work with you on a lease basis. There are any number of vendors that will work with you on another deal basis, which involves a split of net revenues here as far as that goes. So you don't necessarily have to look at eating this whole cost out of the gate. Another thing you might want to look at is, rather than replacing each one of the single heads, look at doing kiosks on the street as well. And that means that you could take 12 single heads off the street potentially and put one kiosk in. Kiosk is going to run you $5,000 to $7,500 here. Once you get over, I used to know this off the top of my head, but I want to say once you get over about 10 heads, it's actually cheaper to go with a kiosk than to go head-by-head replacement. Anything 10 heads below, it's basically a wash typically. Pros and cons of that. It opens up your streetscape. You take all those poles off. You just got that one kiosk on the block face. It looks more attractive. It opens up a little bit more of the sidewalk to pedestrians. The downside is almost everybody in America has seen single head meter and understands how it works. There's a little bit of an education piece if you go over to a kiosk type system. You also have to ask yourself what's the mechanism that you're going to use. A lot of communities go with pay and display. So you go to the kiosk, you pay for some time, you go back, you put your receipt on your dashboard. It tells you when your time is up. Some communities like that, some communities hate that because now I got to make 2 trips. I got to go to the kiosk and now I got to come back
That's how
before
I
I can
feel
go
when I said
where I want to go. You can go with a pay by space, so you paint the number of the space on each space, and then folks just come in and I'm in space 37. They enter that in, they enter in their money, and then they can go off to the races. That works great until it snows. Once it snows, you usually have to look at some sort of alternative. City of Lowell decided to go with this, and they went with this because they had very narrow sidewalks. They thought, we'll get those poles out. First time it snowed, they realized that they had covered all the spaces. Luckily, the poles were still there, and so they mounted the numbers on the poles. So the poles never actually went away. They just found another use. You can go with pay by plate. This is the latest innovation. So you walk over and you enter the plate number of your vehicle and you enter your time and you're off to the races. Again, some places this has worked very well. Some places this has worked very poorly. One of the issues that you have is how many of you know your plate off the top of your head. They did this in the city of Pittsburgh, and they had so many people who were complaining because they got all their plate right except maybe one digit or one letter. They went off and they got a ticket. That the city of Pittsburgh initially issued thousands of these little things that go on your keychain, and you could write your plate number in there. In another community I went into where they had this issue, they had a selfie plate day, and they were encouraging people to take a picture of your plate. And so when you got up there, if you couldn't remember, it's right there on your phone. So again, there's pros and cons to each one of these. You are in the best position to figure out what's going to work for your community if this is the road you decide to go down.
Better stick with the individual heads.
I have a really simple question.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, did you have one?
No.
Are we expensive compared to other communities? Did you look at that at all? As far as, I'm thinking mainly of the metered spaces.
No. Okay, so first question is, what's your comparable? And this is always a tough question for someplace like Brattleboro. When you're someplace like Boston, if I'm in Newton, I can look across to Brookline, I can look across to Watertown, and they're probably going to be competing for the same market. And I can tell you, you're either out of whack or you're in line with your competing markets. With Brattleboro, there's not a lot in terms of competing market here. We benchmarked you against Keene, and you're cheaper than Keene. You're cheaper than Springfield. I don't know that necessarily you're probably drawing more from Keene than you're drawing from Springfield, but those are the two closest comps that you could find. You're cheaper than Montpelier. You're in line with Rutland. You're cheaper than Burlington as far as that goes. So.
Keene only takes quarters, at least when I was there.
Yeah, I know. They're so elitist.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, my head hurts a little bit. But I want to say that I would like to see ideas for the rack. Somebody sent me or us an email and had a valid point that, bikers want to put their bikes where they are. They don't want to be like, oh, I kept my bike in the transportation center today. So I'd like to see some more of that fleshed out a little bit when we have our budget discussion.
I put my bike around a parking meter, but that might sometimes gets in the way of people walking.
Yeah.
So it's like,
We could use a little more something.
Yeah.
But you do have some areas right on Main Street that are hashed out right now. They're driving no parking areas. I mean, that's usually a prime place to do something like this. The one thing you need to make sure that you do is bollard that area off before you put in bike racks, so that the one person who's looking at their phone at the inopportune time is not taking out 4 bikes when they swerve out of their lane.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Thank you so
Any
much.
questions?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone in the public have a
Great.
question?
Great
We have
data.
a couple questions.
I like every one of these recommendations.
Franz Reichsman, Brattleboro. You referred to a survey that you did where there were about 1,000 respondents.
Yes.
How were the surveys distributed? Who had an opportunity to answer that?
The surveys were put up electronically for a period of 3.5 months, if I'm not mistaken. off of the town's website. I know the town did a couple of different media blasts to make people aware of them.
Yep.
We also distributed hard copies through Rod's office, and you can talk about who those went out to.
We distributed them through the library, we distributed them to the downstairs, the kiosk downstairs where people come to get information about their property taxes.
So there was no actual defined population that you drew a sample from?
No,
No,
it was,
we were trying to get the general we were trying to get an overview of the general population rather than a particular
so the
target.
survey design was to push it out to as many possible respondents as possible, and then by having questions that would allow us to establish the profile of the respondent, we would then able to compare that to the census data.
So you're sort of post hoc validating your data by its correspondence to the known census profile of the
Exactly.
town?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not necessarily targeting a particular group because we didn't have a particular issue that we wanted to test.
Yeah.
What we were trying to do is get opinions, insights, thoughts, concerns from the general populace so that we could design against those.
And you certainly got a nice response in terms of the raw numbers. What I'm trying to figure out is how much bias would be in that sample in terms of who chose to respond and who didn't. And you did try to control for that a little bit with the comparing it to known demographic data. I'm not aware of that having been looked at in many settings to determine how accurate then that turns out to be as a controlling mechanism in your study. I'm not expecting you to do anything about this, but as a former epidemiologist and statistician, I am duty-bound to raise this issue of potential bias in your results as relates to your sampling method. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
You are multi-talented. Wayne SD 83 Main Street. Could you give your opinion about the half spaces, for example, at the intersection of Elliott and Main, where motorcycles might park, or two motorcycles in a spot instead of one motorcycle in a spot, where those half spaces could be motorcycle-only spots?
I'm for them. Typically,
and apple pie and flag.
I mean, typically, where you see motorcycle parking installed, it's typically going in a space that wouldn't accommodate a vehicle anyhow, so it's reclaimed space in terms of that. Motorcyclists generally, if you give them that option, they'll generally use it rather than taking up one space that could be occupied by a vehicle. Certainly, based on what I've seen, spending part of a summer and a fall and just walking around today, you have a fairly good representation of that particular demographic here.
Oh, yeah.
And so offering that amenity to them actually allows you to some degree to dictate where they're doing that, and if you can funnel them into space that is going to go underutilized or unutilized elsewhere, you're making the most of the asset that you've got.
So you would recommend that half spaces that are now prohibited or marked not for parking be marked for motorcycles?
If you can recover this space and you can regulate that use, absolutely. Like I said, that's claimed space that right now is doing nothing for you.
Thank you.
Nice job, Wayne.
Thank you. Does
So
anyone
can I
else?
actually ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So as far as I understand, our parking enforcement officers have a policy of ticketing both motorcycles when there's two motorcycles parked in a single median space.
That's horrible.
Is that
Parking people do not.
is that something that you
know
would
that.
discourage?
They have a policy if they ticket both.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be one vehicle. And you get, and I have seen the discussion that, look, this is four wheels, my friend's motorcycle and my motorcycle. That equals four wheels.
Well,
and this car in front
it's
has
true.
four
I have a
wheels.
motorcycle. I
And
hope
why are we
that's
getting
not
ticketed
my friends.
and they're not? And
As,
We would have
as,
rode in the
as
car
a
together.
non-politician,
Four wheels.
I would say as long as they are not exceeding the boundaries of that particular space,
Like, don't put
if
five
you
in
can
there.
cram 6 of them in there, go for it.
My motorcycle's
Right,
tiny.
well,
I
okay,
share.
that's, thank you.
Yeah.
Good, okay.
Does
That's
anyone
all.
else, anyone else have any other questions?
This is fantastic.
This is
Thank
great,
you.
thanks, and
Thank
informs our
you.
next conversation.
Yes.
So thank you.
Quite well. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Enjoy Nantucket.
I just want to, because of the time, we're going to make some changes to the agenda, and we're going to move F, which is the police fire facilities project discussion, to the May 15th meeting.
Okay.
We're going to move I, the solid waste budget discussion, to the this is it, to the May 15th meeting. We're going to save what we do on July 3rd to May 15th, and we're going to do that unless anybody has any objection to that.
I have no
I had a
objection.
feeling.
Did we check in with anyone here for those items? Or-
Are you,
No, yeah, we're good, okay.
yeah, with the, we've informed the police and fire. That's why you saw them.
No problem.
I figured that's what.
Yeah. Is that okay with
Do
everybody?
the town plan, or are we doing that
That's
tonight?
more than
It's
okay.
a town, it's a hearing, we don't have to.
Okay.
It's like
Super. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that I'm.
Oh, yeah. No, this will take 2 seconds.
Okay.
So next up is the town plan amendment, and this is a public hearing. This is one of 2. The first is May 1st, the second is May 15th.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I think the planning department is going to give us a,
Yes.
so I guess what I want to do is call the public hearing on the town plan amendment to order. We're in the hearing now, Rod. I called the hearing to order.
That's why
Yeah.
Thank you, Select Board Chair. I'd like to just outline some history, mostly for the benefit of the newer Select Board members. And also introduce people at table. So with me, I have Sufilian, the planner from the department, and Kathy Erfer, a planning commission member. So I wanted to take you back really quickly to 2013 when we adopted a new town plan that was a large-scale project. It took over 2 years to develop and do the public outreach for. It was interrupted by Tropical Storm Irene, but that was also a major source of input for the plan. And so that plan was adopted formally by the Select Board in February 2013. In 2015, to maintain West Brattleboro Village designation status, we were required to amend the plan by including a map of West Brattleboro Village, the designated village district, which we did, and a small text change. That didn't, that amendment went through in 2015. We were operating under the understanding that meant that our town plan would actually expire 5 years later in 2020. Despite that, the state and the Regional Planning Commission decided on a different interpretation and insisted that our town plan expired in February of this year, 5 years from the original adoption date in 2013. So once we resolved this matter, we undertook a reworking of the 2015 town plan, which gets us to where we are today. The 2018 town plan is fully vetted, it's been fact-checked, it conforms with prevailing statute, so we've got even more maps and other text that relate to statutory requirements. All the chapters have been updated to reflect the implementation of policies and goals identified in the 2013 town plan. And for the most part, the 2013 town plan was an ambitious plan and set out a pretty ambitious schedule for implementation. We're on schedule for implementation of the 2013 town plan. And the major steps that we've taken are we've developed totally new land use regulations that have been adopted. We've undertaken specific neighborhood scale projects, including the Lower Whetstone Resilience Project with the EPA. We've worked to support the creation of new affordable housing with both Brattleboro Housing Partnerships and Windham Windsor Housing Trust. And we've begun the downtown master plan process, including doing the parking study that you just heard about. So this 2018 town plan, which needs to be adopted formally in May, has got totally reworked chapters. You see it in a draft form now that has not been formatted in the same way as the 2013 and the 2015 town plans, but it will be. And it features, for the most part, the chapters that receive the most attention are energy, arts and culture, and economic development. And we're happy to take any comments or questions that you may have.
And this plan that we are looking at was approved by the Planning Commission, correct?
Planning Commission approved this and moved it on to the Select Board for your consideration.
Okay.
And the requirement here is that because of the size of Brattleboro, you hold 2 public hearings as a Select Board, and you have the choices available to you that I went through, the menu I went through before. You can change the text of the plan as you see fit as a Select Board. You can reject the plan outright and send it back to the Planning Commission to start over, or you can substantively amend the town plan, and that would require the Planning Commission to hold another public hearing on that substantive change.
Does anyone on the Select Board have any? Shanta?
I have a question. So it's in the arts and culture section, and my concern is the language that's used to describe the town arts committee. And so there are, on the website, there are 3 active people and 4 vacancies. I'm not sure that's enough for a quorum. And I am concerned that the way it's currently written, that it does not acknowledge, I don't want to say that maybe not active is more gentler than inactive, but they may not be. I'm just curious what's happening with that, or how to state it in a way so that the public who's reading this would be able to discern that wherever, especially in the matrix that's beautifully done in the back that talks about who's responsible for implementing some of those actions. I'm just wondering if there's a way, or if we'd be able to revise some of that language to acknowledge that there's a skeleton crew.
What page is that?
It's on page 57.
Oh, so close.
Okay,
There we go.
let me respond to that. First of all, assuming that some version of this plan is adopted in May, then the life expectancy of this plan currently is 8 years. And so there are certain things, like the existence of a committee or the makeup of a committee, regardless of whether it's Arts Committee or another committee, that for the sake of continuity, we're going to assume exists and assume is viable. Because over the duration of the plan, at any one time, any one of the committees could suffer a situation where it doesn't have enough active members to form a quorum. There are only 2 public panels that I'm aware of in our world that need to be populated and be effective under statute, and that's the Development Review Board and the Planning Commission. They're the 2 appointed panels that are called out in statute that I'm familiar with. So, in other words, there's a lot of other committees in town that could experience challenges in terms of membership or whatever, or fail to meet for reasons to do with them deeming that there's not enough, substantive issues for them to contemplate, and it wouldn't necessarily affect our statutory performance or our statutory role. And so we were aware, obviously, of the Arts Committee and its membership question, but it was concluded that it would be difficult to frame an explanation that wasn't likely to be out of date as soon as we wrote it. We have no way of knowing whether the Arts Committee will be populated with new members or whatever it is. And so it was concluded that the safest and the easiest way of dealing with it was to assume that it exists because the Select Board has not decided to change that circumstance, and then assume that it's going to have a role similar to the way it has in the past. And then lastly, the town manager is the staff person that supports the Arts Committee, and you can speak to it.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify about the current status. So it is the fact that it's dormant right now because without a fourth member, they can't have a quorum.
Right.
And so it's been several months that the Arts Committee's been in that status.
Yep.
But we're coming up on the time when literally either at the next meeting or the meeting after that, I don't remember which one, but literally right around the corner, all of the vacancies for any of the town committees are going to be announced to the public and applications will be encouraged. And then over the course of June and July, you'll likely be making several appointments to various committees. So we would hope that at least, I don't know how many, I shouldn't say at least one because I don't know, some of the three may actually become vacant. But we would hope that the Arts Committee would get repopulated and become active again in the next month or two.
Shanta, could you say a little more specific, exactly where the part
Sure,
is
on page
50?
57.
Yeah, whereabouts on the?
Oh, just the second paragraph under municipal contributions. And I'm just uncomfortable with, clearly the process is the process, so I guess this would be approved and then we won't find out if it becomes active or comes out of its dormant state until after this will have been approved.
Right.
I'm just concerned that the way it reads, that it sounds like there's going to be, that things are moving. I don't know. But I guess there's nothing that can be done about that. I raised this before during your set, right?
Well, it also reads though in the past tense, doesn't it? Because it says like
Yeah.
they have been active.
Right,
They
right,
were.
right,
Do you know what I
right,
mean? So
exactly.
it's-
It's a bit subtle, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's not saying they are active or they
Right.
are, you know what I mean? They have, it's sort of, to me, written in the, does it make you more comfortable if you think about it that way?
I
or-
guess, but it's this, my only main concern is that if, my understanding is that the Town Arts Committee would be playing the role to move along some of these actions in that area. And if they're dormant or continue to be dormant or continue to have some challenges, some of the great things that are laid out in here in terms of reaching across sectors, I'm not sure of the other groups that would step up to do that or take that on. And that's, I've been in that area, and so I know everybody's got their, head down and reaching across and partnering with each other to just make it happen. In the arts community, no. So, and I don't mean to sound harsh.
Interesting
But,
perspective.
well, no, I don't mean to sound harsh, but it's like, people have got I've got so many examples of it. So it would be great, and we don't know the answer. And I guess it's, and Kate, thanks for pointing that out. I'm just sort of like, how do we say, but I guess there's no real way of saying or documenting where things are at now to reflect in this in a way that's transparent to the public. Because I've gotten questions about, Town Arts Committee for a while, and I'd like to know where to be able to point people so that there might be, and I'm not sure quite how to resolve it, but I thought I should raise it at least.
Are there expectations anywhere in this plan that we're saying the Town Arts Committee is going to do something? Or is that just based, you know what I mean?
It's in the matrix.
Oh, is it in the matrix?
If you look at the matrix on page 110, which I love the matrix. It makes it easy to, because I also wanted to look for, and I'm glad the plan included it, I wanted to look for who were the groups or people who were going to be rolling out these things, and you see, you know, town arts committee, town arts committee, town arts committee.
Yeah.
Right. So for
Fair enough.
the Arts and
Yeah.
Cultural Resources chapters shows that there are short, medium, and ongoing roles
Yeah.
for the town arts committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, does it make it sort of incumbent upon us to find people to serve on the committee? I mean, I'm
Right.
wondering,
Well,
as
I-
opposed to changing the town plan, maybe we
Yeah.
need to figure out a way, how do we get,
I would love to hear from them
Able
too.
to
Like,
serve.
I would love to, if they have time or whoever the people, so that we can hear from them what might they need and what are some of the, because I'm just really curious. There's a way in which we don't, so that's a really good question.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear from them.
because I think the way we keep it transparent is exactly what you're doing right now. You brought it up at the right time. Whether or not the town plan needs to be changed, I think
Right.
it's more that we need to start being vocal about the fact that there are goals in this plan.
Yes.
They need to be implemented.
Yep.
And we need humans to do that.
Yes.
So we're yes.
And I understand that it's fine, it's hard to find humans because everybody's stretched. I get
You
that
know,
too.
we find them though.
Yeah,
And
we
we find them by nagging through the microphone. And on Facebook.
We're pointing out the excellent opportunities.
It's a wonderful opportunity to be a part of the solution.
Put it in positive.
I'm a mom, I say nag without it feeling negative.
yeah. So maybe that's the thing, we get the people who are on the arts committee now to come in and talk to them, but there was a point where it was robust, so I think.
Oh, I know. I know. I remember it, and it's heyday.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so does that make sense to you, Shanta, if we were to say, let's get whoever's on the arts committee now, if they will
Yes.
come in, and then we'll figure out a way where we can figure out how to get the word out, maybe get people
Yeah.
who want to be on
Let's have a
it.
discussion, and I understand that the agenda gets filled, so
Yeah.
we'll figure all that out. Yeah.
No, but your concerns are legitimate, because it does say
Yeah.
right here, we're
Yep.
expecting these people to do
That's right.
something.
Yes, exactly.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for this hearing, whether you're on the select board or the public? Yes, Mr. Esty?
Oh, reverse order this time.
Franz Reichsman, Brattleboro. One thing I really hate is when a group of people does a lot of work on a project and comes up with a really good finished project, and then some guy comes along and says, well, why didn't you do this?
Yeah.
Having not participated in the process at all.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And this is kind of triggered by something that was in the newspaper about the parcel at the end of Burge Street that is being redeveloped as part of the floodplain plan. And it's also something that I've been thinking about for, well, at least the past 25 years. And I just also came across a master's thesis done by a student from the University of Massachusetts looking at the possibility of a path along the Whetstone that would connect the downtown to Living Memorial Park. So all these things have been kind of spinning around in my head. I think the Whetstone Path would be just a terrific project and made more feasible by this new parcel that's just about halfway from downtown to the park. And I mean, I just see this as an amazing opportunity. And I didn't really have, the rewriting the town plan was really not on my radar screen at all. But I just, what I'd like to ask is there anything in the plan that would either facilitate or anti-facilitate such a project happening? And what do you think of that idea in light of this new thing happening at the end of Bird Street?
So first, we know that project very well. We've been involved with that project for several years, and there are definitely supports for establishing the community trail network, including kind of. So one of the studies that we did over the past couple of years, in 2016, we worked with the EPA with this design for resilience in the Whetstone corridor, and we actually did look at making that study focused from that parcel to downtown. So we were looking at some ways to create paths downtown, some green spaces. And we know that there are some potential links up to Living Memorial Park. I remember when that grad student was working on the project, I've spoken to him as well. So, you know, the Whetstone Trail or path and began in the 1980s. It kind of, I think, got sidetracked because of rights of way and that kind of easements and things like that. But it's definitely in here to support that.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, it's in here. I just read it tonight.
I saw it.
But I flipped through so many
Franz, you
times
didn't
now.
read the town plan?
Yeah.
I read the whole thing. Did I miss it?
said it was not halfway.
You really meant it.
So on page 76, there's some information
Oh, I
about
bet I ripped it out.
policies about creating a community trail system.
So when will the construction begin?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, thank you.
Wow.
It's going to be hopefully a little quicker than the bridge over the Whetstone between the co-op and the Creston lot. That took 13 years that way.
Yeah.
But Kathy just reminded me, on May 18th, students from the Montessori School are going to be having some public presentations of work. They're working with an artist that entire week about that parcel and about the Whetstone Brook. And so they'll be on the lookout. There'll be some information.
Okay,
They might have some ideas of paths.
This also spontaneously came up amongst three of us on the finance committee who were just, meeting and talking about just the town in general. It wasn't anything official, but all of a sudden this came up, and and everybody just jumped on it and said, "Wow, that is such a great idea! Think of the economic development implications." It just struck me that there's this kind of reservoir of interest, perhaps, in the community, in that if there's some way to, I'd really be interested in hearing more about what the possibilities are and what some steps might be in that direction, et cetera. So if there's anything happening with that, I personally would really like to know about it.
Okay, we'll make sure you know.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments about our discussion on the town plan?
Wednesday, 83 Main Street. I couldn't agree more with Mr. Reichman.
I can't hear you very well.
I couldn't agree any more with Mr. Reichman. I think there might be even more impetus and support after Hurricane Irene and the flooding on Flat Street and the expansion of the 100-year floodplain, that there is probably some very easy, low-hanging fruit, as someone has said tonight, for money for flood mitigation, and that I didn't see in the town plan. I provided some written comments to the board. I suppose you have those, and I will spare everyone, including me, reading them.
Right here.
The things I would like to, but for the home viewing public's entertainment, amending the zoning ordinance in appropriate places to allow public space murals to include an artist's signature and/or website, maybe a fraction of some amount, and that might get the Arts Commission something to do. Encourage the state to locate state executive offices in Windham County, particularly Brattleboro. And that goes along with another area of Marlborough College and the Holstein Association in that area down there where anything could happen to those buildings and then they're vacant. I understand the town is considering having state agencies consolidate into this building. That's nice, except that means other spaces are going to be vacated. I'd rather see brand new state employees in Brattleboro, seeing that Windham County has 6% of the state's population and less than 3% of the state employees. And Burlington and Montpelier have something like 80%. Windham County has 1/29th of the state employee payroll. That's not right for Windham County, and we should get our share right here. I'm going to skip ahead Skip ahead some more. Remodeling the downtown business property's upper floors into Class A office space or better quality apartments instead of not better quality apartments. I don't see anything in there. I saw no dollar resources or administrative support for the Arts Commission and other public art organizations. Sorry, Ms. Lee, but I could not object or not like your suggestion that you I almost said euphemize. Use a euphemism, it was a Freudian slip, that the Arts Commission is somehow recently dormant or has been active. It hasn't been active since I've lived in Brattleboro, and it appears it hasn't been active in a long time. And I suggest instead of using an euphemism to describe its effectiveness, you use honesty. It has been for several years inactive or currently not functioning. And that, I know, Mr. Elwell, you've had several pleas in the newspaper for volunteers, and my understanding is I might have been the last one that ever looked into it and found it so dysfunctional that it was not worth trying to resuscitate. I've mentioned this before. I'd like to see licensing or registration of panhandlers. I don't see anything in the goals of the town. It is legal. It is done in a lot of places. And the last warm weekend, what I heard in Dover was they could not believe how Brattleboro was inundated with panhandlers. And and the panhandlers who live here couldn't believe how all these people, they had no idea who they were, where they came from, were all over the streets, asking people, mothers in strollers and carriages and teenagers for money, and the next day they were gone. That wouldn't happen. I'd like to see a public bathroom somewhere, maybe in the transportation center with a key. It might have a shower facility. Anything. One person, here's the key. Sign in, sign out, show us put your license here. During the day when the traffic office is open, anything. I've had old people ask me on the street, where's a bathroom? I'm an old person. I have to go home. There's no place. And for people who are not dressed well, there's less than no places. They are going in the alley. Where's the camera? Want it right in the alley. That's just wrong. Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
Does anyone else have any comments for our public hearing? We're going to be holding a second public hearing on May 15th. So I will close this public hearing, and we will see you back on May 15th.
Thank you for
Thank
all
you
your work.
for all the work.
Yes.
And for sticking around.
Intensive stuff and for sticking
Yeah.
around.
Half hour.
I just want to give everybody an agenda update. We also are going to put off the Union Station project discussion until the next meeting.
Okay.
So we've got two more items tonight, which is this change the name, street name change, and the grants for the Ballistic vests. So we'll go right to the street name change. We'll have the town manager tell us what this is.
So this is a street in West Brattleboro where there's only two properties served by the street. One of the property owners asked us to change the name from Bro Place to Lilac Lane, and the other property owner has consented to that change, so staff recommends your approval.
Great.
So my only concern, just a question about that, and I won't keep us here too long because I know it's late. I did a Google search just to see, I remember one time a friend was meeting me and they said, I got confused by this street over this other street and Google Maps and GPS and all of that. My only minor concern is if there would be any confusion. There's a Lilac Lane in New Hampshire. There's a Lilac Lane up north in Vermont, but it's not around here, which is fine. So that's my only concern, and maybe we have nothing to do with that, but that's it. If this gets changed, then how will it register for people who are trying to find the place?
I can speak to that, which
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
that's a really valid concern
Yeah.
that we look at for potential confusion in town.
Yep.
There are some historical duplications that exist here where there's two, an avenue and a place, or an avenue and a street that have the same first name. That can get confusing for people, so we don't let that happen anymore. But there is no other Lilac anything in Brattleboro,
Right.
and we don't look outside of Brattleboro to compare to other places.
It was just a
'cause there's,
question, probably a stupid
lots
question,
of
but
duplications
yeah.
if you go
Yeah,
to multiple towns.
All right.
Good question. Okay, any other questions, or does someone want to make a motion?
To adjourn. Oh, sorry. Just a motion to change the name.
Yep. From Bro Place to Lilac Lane?
I move to approve changing the name of Bro Place to Lilac Lane.
Can't keep it together. All those in favor of changing Bro Place to Lilac Lane, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries 5-0. Now we're going to talk about the grants for the ballistic vest for the fire department.
We are, and I'll say just 2 sentences about why, since it's something that I think on first blush, each one of us says, ballistic vest for the fire department, does you mean the police department? This is for the fire department. It's unfortunate but true in this day and age that the firefighters are having to go into situations where there's sometimes actually there's legitimate concern for their safety. So what's different about a ballistic vest for a firefighter than a police officer is instead of being individually fitted and worn all the time, these are larger and go on over their bunker gear, and so they're interchangeable. They're used only for those incidents where the people who are answering the call need to slide one of these on. The department would like to buy 12 of them, and the 2 grants that are before you this evening would provide sufficient funding. If we're successful and receive these grants, and provide sufficient funding to buy the 12 ballistic vests with no town matching money.
Does anyone on the board have any questions about this?
Sounds like a good idea.
Anyone in the public have any questions?
Sounds like a really good
Well,
idea to me.
Would someone like to make a
No
motion?
question?
I'm still freaked out by the mouse.
Oh, you noticed the mouse?
Pulled out my pants leg.
Here?
Oh my
I
goodness.
saw him running. Yeah, he's got that
What do you
one.
got in your pocket?
Oh, Chris, you got your headline.
Cheese over there.
I can make the motion if you'd like.
Yes, please. We gotta get out of here before the mouse gets us.
I'd like to move to make a motion to approve that the following grant applications be submitted for the acquisition of ballistic vests for the fire department. 1, application to Walmart Community Grant Program in the amount of $5,000, and 2, application to the Firefighter Support Foundation in the amount of $2,400.
We have a motion to approve grant applications be submitted for the acquisition of ballistic vests for the fire department. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We have one final motion. Who would like to make it?
I move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you to everybody
I'm so
for
sorry.
staying as late as you did.
Thank you.
And thank you for the little mouse.
Sorry, Franz. I don't know why I can't stop laughing. I feel really bad.
We said it's gonna.
I think I'm just so tired.
Help now.